Marshall Peak Chapter 5986 The Might of a Creator. Amidst the churning waves, Yang Kai's figure appeared as the Tao's strength surged around him. Based on strength alone, he was stronger than both Mo and Zhang Ruoxi after their earlier fight. This was a result of his heightened mastery of Grand Das. The clearest evidence of this was the size of his space-time river. Yang Kai's space-time river was comparable to the one Mu left behind, and it had grown colossal beyond imagination. A baby dragon was bound to become a divine dragon someday. Although Yang Kai's cultivation did not increase by much, his strength was leaps and bounds above what it once was. A piercing gaze shot over at him. Yang Kai immediately spotted Mo, who was standing in the distance. The abhorrence and murderous intent in its eyes were plainly visible. Mo looked a lot like Little 11th, whom Yang Kai met inside the primordial world. If Little 11th grew up as a normal human, he would resemble Mo's current appearance. Ruoxi stood between Yang Kai and Mo with a grim and vigilant expression. Yang Kai had been busy refining Mu's final gift, and knew nothing of what was happening outside the river all this while. Upon sensing Mo and Ruoxi's present states though, he realized that they had engaged in a fight earlier. Both seemed to have walked away injured as neither one of them felt as powerful as he expected them to be. His divine sense tingled as it spread out like a gush of water. Soon he picked up on the situation out on the battlefield in the distance. Yang Kai's brow furrowed slightly. Compared to the situation over here, the human race army and the small stone race army were in a bleak situation. If things continued as they were, they would certainly be defeated. Ruoxi, Yang Kai called out at once. I'm here, sir, Zhang Ruoxi swiftly replied. Head to the battlefield and help them. Zhang Ruoxi was startled. She figured that since Yang Kai had emerged, they could work together to take on Mo now. While she could not face off against Mo alone, if she and Yang Kai worked together, they had a good chance of winning this fight. Mo was a lot weaker now thanks to both Yang Kai's deed of suppressing and sealing his source as well as the earlier fight with Zhang Ruoxi. Light and darkness had clashed and worn each other down. If they got rid of Mo, they would completely eradicate the threat against the 3,000 worlds. Yang Kai seemed to have deduced Zhang Ruoxi's thoughts as he said, the human race army is the only remaining strength we have now. A victory against Mo is meaningless if they get wiped out. Go and help them at once, Ruoxi. Leave things here to me. Zhang Ruoxi knew that Yang Kai was right. If the human race army was entirely vanquished, then even if she and Yang Kai managed to defeat Mo, it was a pointless victory. The goal of this battle was to ensure the survival of the human race, and victory hinged on bringing the entire army to victory. She clenched her jaw and said, Be careful, sir. I'll come back as soon as possible. After glaring viciously at Mo one last time, her wings fluttered and she turned into a streak of light before shooting off towards the battlefield. Once she left, Mo and Yang Kai were left alone in the void. A wise decision, Mo remarked. Yang Kai quirked his eyebrows. How so? She's in a poor state right now, Mo commented with a faint smile. You asked her to leave to save her life, right? Yang Kai's brow was tightly knitted. I thought I was going up against an evil being who has lost all its rationality. I didn't expect to be facing off against an intelligent opponent. This makes things a lot more challenging. With just one look, Yang Kai noticed Zhang Ruoxi's condition. Although he did not know what would happen when the Heaven's Order bloodline harmonized the powers of Yin and Yang, he could tell that the 8 Ninth Order small stone race masters behind Ruoxi were on the verge of crumbling apart. As the core of the 9 palaces formation, she was undoubtedly shouldering the heaviest burden. If she stayed here and partook in the fight against Mo, once the 8 fell apart, Ruoxi would be doomed once Mo found the chance to strike her down. Naturally, protecting Ruoxi was not the only reason why Yang Kai told her to leave. The human race and the small stone race were in dire need of help too. They were bound to lose if they did not receive any outside intervention on the battlefield. Now that Zhang Ruoxi had gone back to the battlefield, it was unlikely for her to be involved in any fight as taxing as the one against Mo earlier. As long as she was careful and ensured that her 8 personal guards did not die, she would not be in any grave danger. That being said, Yang Kai was taken aback by the current Mo. As Yang Kai said, he thought he would be facing an evil being without any sense of rationality. However, Mo was evidently able to think and act calmly. Yang Kai would much rather go up against a senseless killing machine as it was easier to deal with an opponent like that. I'm surprised you didn't stop me from devouring and refining Mu's spacetime river, Yang Kai spoke up. While refining the gift from Mu, he was vigilant against the possibility of Mo interfering, but the latter did not do anything else after his initial attempt was interrupted. Although Zhang Ruoxi had come over in time to occupy Mo, what Yang Kai saw when he came out was simply a silent standoff between Mo and Ruoxi. It was entirely unexpected. He knew that Mo could have chosen to forcefully break away from Ruoxi, though he would have to pay a price. However, from Mo's standpoint, stopping Yang Kai from refining Mu's river had to be the primary goal, and it would have been worth paying a price to accomplish that. After hearing Yang Kai's comment, Mo lowered his eyes and let out a soft sigh. Did Mu leave something in the river to be used against me? Yang Kai nodded. You noticed that, as expected. Mu had left her spacetime river for someone who would succeed her, but it was impossible to refine the entire river in the blink of an eye. During that time, Mo was bound to interfere. It was not surprising that someone with as much intelligence and foresight as Mu had considered this, and left something behind inside the river to target Mo. If Mo entered her river, he would end up stumbling around the endlessness of spacetime in a hazy daze, and would not be able to find Yang Kai. What Mo said to Zhang Ruoxi earlier was simply for the sake of convincing her. Even if she did not try to stop him, he would not enter the river unless absolutely necessary. But without entering the river, he would not be able to locate Yang Kai, and thus, he would not be able to stop the latter from devouring and refining it. With all that Mu had set in place, Yang Kai had guaranteed success at refining the river. Mu had been wise and insightful, and naturally, Mo knew her incredibly well. After spending all those years together, both she and Mo had a thorough understanding of each other. Just as Mu predicted the possibility of Mo entering the river, Mo also figured that Mu would have left behind countermeasures to deal with him as well. It was yet another confrontation after all these years that resulted in a stalemate. Yang Kai was the only one who benefited from the situation. He had a major leap in his mastery over the 10,000 Grand Das, and his spacetime river had grown to an indescribable size. Even if you obtained the power Mu left behind, so what? Mo's eyes were filled with disdain. Do you think that's enough for you to defeat me? Yang Kai smirked. Let me see what someone in the creator realm can do. As he spoke, he raised both his hands and the spacetime river beneath him began churning violently. It was as if the river turned into a rampaging dragon, as the waves crashed in thunderous splashes while Dao's strength surged. All at once, scores of rope-like water dragons formed from Dao's strength shot out of the river and flew straight at Mo. Mo raised his fist and punched forcefully at the void. The space in front of him shattered and the myriad of void cracks that formed as a result turned into a barrier that blocked the onslaught of the water dragons. Then Mo took a step forward and moved past the shattered space, arriving right in front of Yang Kai as he stared down at him with an indifferent expression. Your ability to wield Dao's strength is less than 1,000th of what Mu was capable of. Black ink strength rippled forth and its destructive power wrapped around Mo's fist, which came crashing down. Yang Kai's eyes hardened. He could instinctively sense the might of this punch and knew he could not allow it to make contact with him. Otherwise, death would be his only fate. The river churned and formed a layer of Dao strength that acted as a barrier. However, the Dao strength barrier only lasted for a blink of an eye before the fist shattered it apart. Thankfully, that had given Yang Kai enough time to summon his Azure Dragon Spear. Now that he had his weapon in hand, he harnessed the Dao strengths and sent his spear flying out at the fist. A gust of unstoppable power came at Yang Kai from the front, and he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His body froze up for a brief moment before he went flying backwards. He stumbled into his river and nearly lost his grip on the spear. Weak? Mo looked down at his fist. There was a tiny white mark left behind from the Azure Dragon Spear, but it soon vanished. The invincible Azure Dragon Spear could not even scratch Mo despite Yang Kai landing a strike with all his strength. This was a clear sign of the power disparity between the two. A powerful and imposing manner did not necessarily translate into true might. A real master could easily keep his power hidden and undetectable from the outside. Yang Kai's outward display of dominance and imposingness was in fact a sign that he could not fully control the power he had. A figure stepped out of the river. It was Yang Kai who had been pushed back inside it earlier. His expression was grim. Even though he deduced that he was not strong enough to be Mo's equal right now, he did not expect their disparity to be this big. Is this the might of someone in the creator realm? Yang Kai had suppressed and sealed over 30% of Mo's source, so what would Mo be able to do if that had not been the case? His earlier punch would have probably been enough to kill me. While Yang Kai was caught up in these thoughts, Mo was already storming over. Even though Yang Kai used the Tao strengths of the river to form barriers and restraints, it was not enough to stop Mo. Apart from black ink strength, yet another mysterious power was swirling around Mo. It was most likely creation force. All of the Tao strengths that came near Mo would instantly shatter without accomplishing anything. As soon as Yang Kai managed to steady himself, Mo arrived in front of him, his fist flying out again, aiming to pulverize his opponent. Yang Kai was not about to let that happen. Waves rippled out of the Azure Dragon Spear with Tao strength circling it as it moved forward once more. Mo did not change his attack, but the simple blow was hiding an unfathomable strength that allowed it to easily deflect Yang Kai's attack before closing in on its target. Martial Peak Chapter 5987, Absorbing Tao Strengths. In that moment of crisis, Yang Kai's Azure Dragon Spear suddenly vanished from his hand as he stowed it away. Following that, he grabbed Mo's shoulder with both hands and flung himself backwards in an attempt to drag Mo into the space-time river. The short exchange just now made it clear to Yang Kai that he was unable to hold his own against Mo right now. Since that was the case, he needed to bring the fight to an advantageous environment for him, and the space-time river was an excellent choice. Yang Kai was confident that as long as he was able to drag Mo into his space-time river, he would be able to unleash even more powerful attacks that could perhaps be enough to deal with this enemy. However, before Yang Kai could do anything else, Mo kicked him. Yang Kai felt his chest caving in as he fell into the river. Waste! Mo stood above the river. The torrential waves fiercely charged at Mo, but they would die out once they were within 10 steps of him, filling his eyes with disappointment. Mu's successor is weaker than I thought. He's not even stronger than that woman earlier who wielded a portion of the primordial light's power. At the very least, she'd been able to cause a bit of trouble for me, but Mu's successor is nothing more than a child. As Mo quietly eyed the space-time river beneath him, he lightly raised his hand. In that case, I shall destroy it all. A gust of pure and concentrated black ink strength, unlike any that had been seen before, poured out towards the space-time river, as the might of a creator began to emerge. Any part of the river that was touched by black ink strength immediately showed signs of being corrupted by it. The river was made out of Tao strengths. Ordinarily, black ink strength from the Black Ink clan was only capable of corrupting living beings. However, as the source of black ink strength, Mo was even capable of corrupting Tao strengths. As Yang Kai's body sank downwards into the river, his heart sank along with it. With just 2 strikes, he had a clear understanding of just how powerful Mo was. I definitely won't be able to defeat him. Yang Kai coughed lightly and the stench of blood filled his mouth. He was now a divine dragon with thick skin and hard flesh, impervious to most ordinary strength, but a simple kick from Mo was enough to break a few of his ribs. It had been a long time since he last suffered such injuries. The pain of his broken bones sticking into his organs cleared his mind, and in the very next breath, he sensed the changes happening to his space-time river. He realized the severity of the situation. If Mo was allowed to continue what he was doing, sooner or later, his space-time river would be completely corrupted by black ink strength. He would lose all his Tao strengths, and even if he did not die, he would become crippled and useless. The urgent sense of danger consumed Yang Kai, and he knew that if he did not do something soon, it would be too late. After stabilizing himself, Yang Kai gathered his thoughts and wielded all the strength he could muster. The next instant, his body turned into an invisible black hole that devoured large amounts of the river's water. He was refining the Tao strengths and absorbing them into his body. Yang Kai had been able to put away his original space-time river and summon it out when he wanted to deal with his opponent, because he had gained the river through hard work and diligent cultivation. It was the manifestation of his own Tao strengths. However, the gift from Mu had been too overwhelming. Even though he used his space-time river to devour and refine Mu's space-time river, which led to a great increase in his mastery over the 10,000 Grandas, he now had a problem on his hands too. He did not have full control over his new space-time river. Currently, he was like a 3-year-old who was trying to wield a massive sledgehammer. Though the sledgehammer was powerful, he could not even lift it. That was the reason why he could not fight back against Mo. It was to the point where he seemed even weaker than Zhang Ruoxi. After all, Ruoxi had diligently cultivated for some 2,000 years in the chaotic dead territory. By using her Heaven's Order bloodline to harmonize the powers of yin and yang to a level where she could control it, she was able to unleash all of that power freely. There was only one way for Yang Kai to deal with his current situation, and that was to refine the Tao strengths and absorb them into his body. That was the only method for him to gain control over his new space-time river and be strong enough to oppose Mo. It was an extremely dangerous move. If he were careless for even a moment, he would explode from the overwhelming power of the massive space-time river and would undoubtedly die. That was the reason why Yang Kai did not choose to do so earlier, but under the present circumstances, he had to throw caution to the wind and take the risk. As he did this, a huge vortex emerged on top of the river. It looked like a large mouth that was swallowing the water. Meanwhile, Mo was still channeling his black ink strength and corrupting the river. By doing so, Mo could even absorb the river and strengthen itself. After seeing the appearance of the vortex though, Mo's eyes flashed with an unreadable glimmer as he scoffed. "You finally realized it?" Mo had spent many years with Mu and understood the spacetime river far better than Yang Kai did, so he could immediately tell what Yang Kai was doing when he saw the movement of the river. Both of them continued to refine the power of the spacetime river, which rapidly shrank before them. When it came down to it though, this was still Yang Kai's spacetime river. Thus, Mo could not refine it as quickly as Yang Kai could. It could be said that Yang Kai and Mo were devouring the river at a ratio of 7-3. Beneath the river, Yang Kai's face had turned red as his dragon vein throbbed with ferocity within him. The Tao strengths he devoured and absorbed into his body made him feel as if he were going to explode. He even had the urge to transform into a divine dragon. Nevertheless, he squashed down this thought. Although turning into a divine dragon could ease the pressure on his body, there was still a limit. It would not make a difference if he could not find a way to surpass that limit. Therefore, he chose to grit his teeth and bear it. Thankfully, he had endured a similar kind of pressure when he first started taking in the gift Mu left behind, and was now able to have a marginally easier time with it. As time passed, the massive spacetime river had shrunk by about 30%. Beneath the river, Yang Kai was surrounded by Tao strengths, while above the river, Mo's aura had grown a lot stronger too. All of a sudden, Yang Kai's eyes hardened. As he continued to devour the power of the river, he raised his hands and snarled, "Rise!" The spacetime river that cut across the void seemed to abruptly come to life as the water churned and the waves came crashing down at Mo's gaze darkened as he swiftly backed off. He knew that even with his present strength, he would have a hard time if he was struck by the full force of the spacetime river. His eyes briefly flickered with surprise as he did not think that Yang Kai would be able to gain control over the spacetime river so quickly. If Yang Kai was previously likened to a 3-year-old attempting to wield a sledgehammer and failing due to his lack of strength, then he was now a young child able to raise the sledgehammer, though luck and fate would determine whether or not he could strike his opponent with it. As the river surged, Yang Kai's figure appeared out of it. It was clear that something was not right with his present state. It was as if an indescribable power gathered within his body. He looked like he was about to explode at any given moment. That was indeed the case. He was at his limit from the Tao strengths that had built up inside him. He felt a pressing need to let it all out of him, so with that thought in mind, he shot up and charged at Mo. As he moved, the colossal spacetime river followed behind him like a shadow. Martial Peak Chapter 5988, Battle to the Death. In a flash, the two silhouettes collided and a fight broke out. Yang Kai took the offensive and pushed out Tao strengths with each strike. He had to release the Tao strengths which had accumulated inside his body. Otherwise, he ran the risk of exploding. As a result of his ferocious attacks, Mo had to focus and fight back as well, using black ink strength to clash with and wipe out the rampaging Tao strengths. Even in the midst of the fight, Yang Kai did not stop devouring the spacetime river. There was a large vortex behind him that was sucking the river water into his body. As Yang Kai continued absorbing Tao strength into his body, the power he could wield grew stronger and his attacks became more intense. After exchanging a dozen blows, Yang Kai suffered a hit from Mo and flew backwards into the river. However, he soon emerged and charged at Mo once again. Although he faced setbacks, Yang Kai showed no sign of despair. Instead, his thirst for battle grew even stronger. During the first clash between the two, Mo could send Yang Kai flying back into the river as soon as he emerged. Despite being a Ninth Order master, Yang Kai could not fight back at all. Yet, he could now hold out against Mo for a brief moment. This was the result of his absorbing the Tao strengths into his body. It was also the reason why he could control even more of the river's power. I can do better than this, Yang Kai firmly believed. As long as I can control the entire river, I'll be powerful enough to challenge Mo. Time and time again he shot out at Mo and was knocked back. The space-time river continued to shrink as Yang Kai's aura grew even more powerful. As time passed, Yang Kai was able to hold out against Mo for increasing amounts of time. From withstanding an exchange of 10 or so blows, he was able to slowly increase that number to 20, 30, eventually reaching 100 without showing any sign of falling behind. This seemed to set Mo off, and his attacks grew even more vicious as murderous intent surged. Yang Kai used the profound source gate to suppress and seal over 30% of Mo's source, which weakened the latter by a fair amount. Mo's power had also been further weakened after the fight with Zhang Ruoxi. That being said, he had corrupted a sizable chunk of the river's power with black ink strength, which allowed him to make up for what he lost in the fight with Zhang Ruoxi. Mo was even more powerful now than when he first woke up. In a short amount of time, Yang Kai was able to go from being completely powerless against Mo to just barely holding out against him, but that was already his limit. He couldn't defeat Mo in his current state. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Even if I gain control over the remaining river, it's unlikely that I'll be able to kill him. If Mo, the one behind everything, did not die, then the threat against all of existence would endure. Using the profound source gate to suppress and seal Mo's source had been the right thing to do. Yang Kai's previous journey had proved that the profound source gate could indeed accomplish that feat. However, when one went up against an entity this powerful, how was one supposed to suppress and seal them without defeating them first? The only way to end this once and for all was to break out of the shackles of the open heaven realm and ascend to a higher realm. However, this was something impossible for the current Yang Kai. It had not been long since he became a Ninth Order master, and although he used the 2 open heaven realm cradles and the power of his space-time river to speed up his cultivation dramatically, it was only effective for him to grow within the Ninth Order realm. It was not enough for him to reach the realm beyond. Throughout history, the best and most talented humans had been limited by the shackles of the open heaven realm method. They could not break through them at all. Only Mu had been able to vaguely peek into the mysteries of an even higher martial Tao. Nevertheless, her space-time river was incomplete, and she could not step over the barriers to enter the mysterious realm she touched upon. Even though Yang Kai had received Mu's gift, it was unlikely that he could accomplish what Mu and all the human race ancestors could not in such a short time. He did not have the barest inkling of enlightenment regarding the next realm. If he wanted to break out of the shackles of the open heaven realm, at the very least, he had to familiarize himself with his present strength and continue to gain knowledge and understanding through many years of accumulation and cultivation. Since he could not overcome the shackles of the open heaven realm, he had to find another way. Yang Kai dared not allow himself to be distracted for even a moment in his battle against Mo. He was up against an opponent who could kill him off at any moment. Over and over again, Yang Kai was sent flying backwards into the river. Although he looked completely battered, his situation was slowly taking a turn for the better. Only about 30% of the space-time river behind him was left now. The moment he absorbed all of the river, he would be able to wield strength far beyond what he could before. Oh, as the intense fight had broken out between Yang Kai and Mo, the fight on the battlefield in the distant void was just as ferocious. The Black Ink clan army was too numerous, and the allied armies of the human race and the small stone race were beginning to show signs of defeat. If nothing changed, sooner or later, both armies would be completely wiped out. Once that happened, even the Ninth Order masters could not be certain whether they could escape with their lives. Only the 2 giant spirit gods could most likely leave safely. This was not an outcome they could accept. Just as the battle reached its most pressing climax, a dazzling light shot out from the depths of the void. It was a familiar scene that renewed the human race master's spirits as they knew who had come. As per Yang Kai's instructions, Zhang Ruoxi rushed back to the battlefield. The moment she arrived, she turned into a bolt of light that weaved across the battlefield multiple times. The flowing light acted like a sharp blade that slaughtered countless Black Ink clan soldiers and wrecked the seemingly impenetrable formations they had set up. All at once, the humans and the small stone race were relieved of much of the pressure they had been under. Soon after that, Ruoxi headed over to Ada and Aer. The two giant spirit gods had proved to be invaluable allies to the humans, be it during the reoccupation of the No-Return Pass or the battle that broke out against the Black Ink Black Reinforcement Army. In both situations, the giant spirit gods had played pivotal roles. Ada and Aer were currently in a tough situation once again. They were surrounded and besieged by many royal lords and could not provide any help to the rest of the battlefield. Therefore, after relieving the pressure against the allied armies of the human race and the small stone race, Zhang Ruoxi chose to aid the two giant spirit gods. As long as the two giant spirit gods were unencumbered, they would be able to draw the attention of a large number of masters from the Black Ink clan. The Black Ink clan would have to send even more royal lords over to keep these two occupied, thus relieving the pressure on the rest. Ruoxi alone was enough to rampage through enemy lines and leave the royal lords scared witless, let alone when she had formed a 9 palaces formation with her 8 personal guard. In the blink of an eye, the flash of light appeared beside Aer. The 8 small stone race masters scattered around to seal the surroundings, their battle formation encapsulating a large portion of the void. The royal lords who had been attacking Aer paled in response. They had learned the hard way just how terrifying this winged woman could be. Before the primordial heaven's source grand restriction had even broken, she had charged inside alone and exterminated all the masters who lingered at the opening, which included dozens of royal lords. Her actions back then terrified the masters inside the grand restriction, so much so that they were too afraid to make any rash moves. Many royal lords had remained hidden in the darkness. They had personally witnessed how powerful Zhang Ruoxi was and were afraid of her strength. This was the reason why the Black Ink clan army did not rush out the moment the grand restriction broke. They only gained the courage to leave the shelter of darkness when she rushed into the depths of the void to deal with the Supreme One. No one expected this woman to come charging back out on the battlefield at such a critical moment. Naturally, if Mi Jingluan could tell which way the battle was going, the royal lords could as well. The Black Ink clan army had the upper hand right now, and as long as no unexpected variables were introduced, the Black Ink clan would eventually be able to vanquish the humans and small stone race. When the time came, all of existence would belong to the Black Ink clan as the human race would be wiped out in totality. They were only a step away from their grand success, so how could the royal lords back down now? Thus, even though Zhang Ruoxi and her personal guard were wielding the might of their 9 palaces formation, a large number of masters from the Black Ink clan still fearlessly charged forward to stop them. Once again, the allied armies of the humans race and the small stone race were relieved of even more pressure. As the sword light of the Heaven's Order sword flashed, the part of the battlefield where Zhang Ruoxi was seemingly turned into an abyss of death. Be it territory lords or royal lords, none could escape from her or even put up a fight. Each time sword light flashed, numerous masters from the Black Ink clan perished. Their glory and dignity as masters was completely trampled on. Once someone reached a certain level of power, it became child's play for them to slaughter those in their path. In just a few moments, over 20 royal lords were killed. Aer, who had been harassed by the royal lords all this time, was finally freed from those who had been keeping him pinned down. With a loud roar, he began attacking the nearby royal lords. However, before he could truly unleash his strength, a new group of royal lords rushed over. The Black Ink clan could tell that the allied armies no longer posed a threat to them, and they could use their advantage in numbers to keep them occupied. At this moment, the only ones who posed a threat to the Black Ink clan were Zhang Ruoxi and the 2 giant spirit gods. Thus they had to stop these 3 no matter what, even if it cost them the lives of their royal lords. On this part of the battlefield, royal lords and territory lords fell like leaves from a tree in a howling storm. The black blood and Black Ink strength that escaped their corpses turned the void into a patch of darkness, which seemed to want to devour everything in its wake. Amidst it all, the sword light of the Heaven's Order sword shone brilliantly. Despite the show of force she was putting on, Zhang Ruoxi's original plan had actually been foiled. Initially, she wanted to save Air before working together with him to extricate Ada. Then, the three of them could charge out onto the main battlefield and rampage. Even though the Black Ink clan was massive in numbers, they would not be able to stop the three of them from slaughtering those in their path if they remained mobile. Given enough time and room to take action, these three powerful existences could massacre the entire Black Ink clan army on their own. However, the Black Ink clan promptly reacted to the situation and Zhang Ruoxi ended up being tied down to this part of the battlefield. Even Air, whom she had only just rescued, was once again completely surrounded by royal lords and could no longer do much. Now that it had come to this, Zhang Ruoxi acted per the hand she was dealt. Since they wanted to impede her, they would have to pay an exorbitant price. Compared to her original plan, the present situation was actually even more beneficial for the human race army. The more the masters from the Black Ink clan focused on her, the less pressure the humans faced. In fact, if she managed to kill off enough royal lords, she would undoubtedly be helping the allied armies secure the final victory. Thus, Zhang Ruoxi was not upset by the Black Ink clan's actions. On the contrary, it suited her just fine. The royal lords came at her one after the other. They all turned into corpses under the Heaven's Order sword. But even so, none of those from the Black Ink clan showed any inclination to retreat. For both the human race and the Black Ink clan, this was the final battle that would decide their fate. They could not back down no matter what. This was a make-or-break battle that would determine who would go down in history as the ultimate victor. Martial Peak, Chapter 5989, Zhang Ruoxi's Persistence. Zhang Ruoxi persistently swung her sword, and every swing of her sword brought about significant results. Ever since her return, no fewer than 300 royal lords had died at her hands in just 2 days. That was an extremely terrifying number. It had to be said that there were only a few dozen Ninth Order masters among the human race at present. The number of royal lords was many times more than the number of Ninth Order masters. Furthermore, the inheritance accumulated in the primordial heaven source grand restriction over millions of years could not be underestimated. Even though Zhang Ruoxi had slaughtered so many royal lords, many more royal lords were surrounding Zhang Ruoxi and the two giant spirit gods still. Zhang Ruoxi relentlessly slaughtered her enemies, and the movement of drawing her sword had almost become an instinctive reaction by now. The Black Ink clan had shifted the focus of the battle around her, which certainly resolved the crisis that had been looming over the human race army. At this moment, the allied armies of the human race and the small stone race finally regained their ability to hold their own against the Black Ink clan, even though they continued to face some pressure on the main battlefield. The situation was no longer as hopeless as before, where their defeat had been imminent and there was no hope for victory. The Black Ink clouds condensed from the dissipated Black Ink strength had reached extreme concentration. Even the Ninth Order masters felt apprehensive when they saw the dense Black Ink clouds that encompassed the huge void. Aside from Zhang Ruoxi and the two giant spirit gods, nobody could easily venture into the depths of the Black Ink clouds to fight against the Black Ink clan. Meanwhile, the immaculate white wings behind Zhang Ruoxi's back began to glow with a faint yellow and blue hue. The subtle change resembled an omen of something to come. At a certain moment, one of the royal lords fearlessly charged towards a Ninth Order small stone race master. He gathered all his strength in his fist and punched the personal guard with all his might. The personal guard staggered from the blow, then it immediately followed up with a violent counterattack that immediately killed the royal lord. Although the small stone race personal guard was equivalent to Ninth Order masters, these were currently joined in a 9 palaces formation with Zhang Ruoxi as its core. Any one of them could borrow the power of the battle formation at any time, so their current strength could no longer be judged by their mere cultivation alone. It could be said that Zhang Ruoxi and her 8 personal guards were one. The attacks unleashed by any party in the battle formation carried the culmination of their combined powers. Even if the royal lords were strong, they could not withstand such attacks. Therefore, many royal lords had died at the hands of the personal guard over the last 2 days. The personal guard who slaughtered the royal lord earlier prepared to make its next move, but just as it raised its fist to attack, its hand shattered to dust. It was immediately followed by its arm, which then spread to its body. In the blink of an eye, the powerful personal guard was reduced to a pile of rubble. The surrounding royal lords and territory lords besieging it froze in surprise. When Zhang Ruoxi returned, her personal guard had all been covered in deep cracks. It was only natural for the surrounding royal lords and territory lords to notice such an obvious thing. They initially thought that the personal guards wouldn't last for long, which is why they targeted them while simultaneously attacking Zhang Ruoxi. It was not until they paid a horrendous price that they realized one thing. These personal guards might look like they were about to fall apart at any moment, but they remained capable of unleashing a despairing amount of power with every blow. That was until this moment. In the end, the personal guard could not withstand the pressure of the drawn-out battle and shattered to pieces. At the same time, the yellow and blue hue of the wings behind Zhang Ruoxi's back increased significantly when the personal guard crumbled to dust. Fortunately, Zhang Ruoxi seemed to have anticipated the situation and immediately switched the battle formation to the 8 trigrams formation. An increasingly violent barrage of attacks ensued. After the first personal guard shattered to pieces, the Black Ink clan suddenly saw hope in regard to their struggle to defeat Zhang Ruoxi. Their assault only became more and more aggressive as a result. Half a day later, the second personal guard shattered to pieces and the 8 trigrams formation subsequently changed to the 7 stars formation. Another half-day passed, and the third one broke apart. When Zhang Ruoxi led her personal guard against Mo, they sustained indelible damage during the battle. If there had been enough time, she would have allowed them to rest and recover. Unfortunately, they were in the middle of a large-scale battle. There was no time for them to even catch their breaths, much less recuperate from their wounds. They only managed to persist until now because the intensity of the current battle paled in comparison to her solo battle against Mo. Even so, her personal guard had finally reached their limits. One after another, they crumbled to pieces. Their destruction also signified that the battle formation was steadily weakening. As the battle formation weakened, the power they could exert was also considerably reduced. At the same time, the yellow and blue hue of the wings behind her back became extremely obvious. When the 6th personal guard shattered, Zhang Ruoxi forcefully changed the battle formation to the most basic 3 fortunes formation. At that moment, the Black Ink clan finally saw the light at the end of the tunnel. It would not take much longer to defeat her. A voice abruptly sounded in Zhang Ruoxi's mind, "Silly girl, you can't carry on in such a reckless manner. At this rate, you will soon struggle to maintain the balance between yin and yang. You will die if that happens." In the chaotic dead territory, Zhang Ruoxi spent 2,000 years harmonizing the power of yin and yang, using her Heaven's Order bloodline. By doing so, her strength surged to unprecedented heights. She rapidly grew from an 8th Order master to a mighty existence who could fight against Mo alone. Nevertheless, she was still just a master at the peak of the 9th Order without the power she was granted by the burning light and serene glimmer. Previously, she had maintained a balance between the powers of yin and yang with her bloodline, and both Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan had remained sleeping deep within her body. However, they were beginning to regain consciousness as a result of her continuous fights and the deaths of her personal guard. That was not a good thing for her. The situation indicated that her bloodline was starting to have trouble maintaining a balance between the power of yin and yang. Just as Big Brother Huang said, if she were to lose control now, a master at the peak of the 9th Order like her would not be able to withstand the pressure of their rampaging power and would instantly perish. Zhang Ruoxi remained silent. Forming the 3 fortunes formation with her 2 remaining personal guards, she persisted in her slaughter. At this moment, the number of Black Ink clansmen gathered around her had reduced significantly. Their numbers were far less than their initial numbers due to her desperate slaughter of her enemies. No matter how many there was bound to be a time when they were completely obliterated. At this juncture, the masters from the Black Ink clan were no longer as desperate as they were before, though. Instead, they constantly wandered around her and forced her to expend her energy while keeping themselves safe from harm. They were evidently waiting for the destruction of her 2 remaining personal guards. Once she lost the support of the battle formation, the threat she posed towards the Black Ink clan would be greatly reduced. Realizing that, Big Brother Huang sighed and said no more. He knew that Zhang Ruoxi couldn't stop fighting at this time. After all, this battle was related to the survival of the entire human race. The slightest wavering would lead to their eternal doom. There was only one thing he could do for her at this moment. He attempted to cooperate with Big Sister Lan, trying to coordinate the power of the yin and yang in her body, and prevent the balance between their respective strengths from being broken. Unfortunately, what they could do was extremely limited. The situation gradually developed in the direction that the Black Ink clan were hoping for. When the 7th personal guard shattered to pieces, it became impossible for Zhang Ruoxi to form a battle formation with just her last personal guard. The Black Ink clan had been waiting a long time for this very moment, and they immediately swarmed forward and tore the last personal guard apart. In an instant, Zhang Ruoxi sunk into the dire situation of fighting a solo battle. Meanwhile, Ada and Aer were also being restrained by many masters from the Black Ink clan. They could not break free to help her. Death slowly approached her. Just as she was at her most vulnerable, something resembling a violent torrent suddenly tore through the dense layers of the Black Ink clan army and swiftly approached the battlefield where she was located. It was none other than the human race army that had been fighting fiercely this whole time. Martial Peak Chapter 5990 The Divine Spirits. When the human race army first departed from the Noreturn Pass on their second crusade, there were over 20 million masters. Unfortunately, their numbers had dwindled by more than half at this moment. What's more, their current numbers were only possible because the small stone race army had withstood the brunt of the pressure from their enemies. If not for the small stone race army, the human race army would have been defeated in battle long ago. Countless heroes fell on this vast battlefield. The severed limbs and dismembered corpses of the Black Ink clan littering the void were basically a manifestation of their military merits. The period when Zhang Ruoxi had penetrated the depths of the void and fought with Mo had been the most difficult for the human race army. Countless Black Ink clansmen had besieged and intercepted the humans, leading to the deaths of many brave soldiers. Even the Ninth Order masters had suffered several casualties, with their deaths hitting morale particularly harshly. However, the pressure faced by the human race army decreased substantially when Zhang Ruoxi returned with her battle formation of personal guard. She was the reason why so many masters from the Black Ink clan were killed. In such a fierce and chaotic battlefield, the slightest negligence could be fatal. Most of the human race masters on the battlefield were unaware of Zhang Ruoxi's dire state. Be that as it may, how could Mi Jingluan, who had been keeping an eye on the overall situation on the battlefield, be oblivious to her circumstances? The Black Ink clan had shifted the focus of the battle to Zhang Ruoxi. During this period, Mi Jingluan could only watch anxiously as the personal guard around her were destroyed one by one until she fell into a critical condition. Zhang Ruoxi was undoubtedly one of the keys to winning this war. If she were defeated and killed, then the human race army would lose their only hope at victory. Therefore, she had to be protected no matter the cost. Even though that was the case, what strength did the human race army have to help her right now? Mi Jinglong racked his brains for an answer but could not think up a good plan. Recklessly charging forward with what remained of the human race army without a suitable plan would not help her. In fact, his actions would only place the humans in greater danger instead. At this moment, the human race army could borrow the strength of the small stone race army to offset the pressure from their enemies. However, that was only possible thanks to the cooperation between the human race army and the small stone race army. If they charged out, they would be separated from the small stone race army. Under such circumstances, the pressure that the humans would have to withstand on their own was unfathomable. At the critical moment, a blood-drenched Yang Shao suddenly rushed towards Mi Jingluan, and after a brief conversation, the latter made up his mind. Under his command, the human race army instantly condensed their forces into an attack formation, broke through the Black Ink clan's heavy encirclement, and charged towards Zhang Ruoxi like a violent storm. At this moment, many top masters from the Black Ink clan had been slaughtered by Zhang Ruoxi, and out of those that remained, more than 100 royal lords were working together to restrain Ada and Aer while nearly 200 surrounded Zhang Ruoxi. Therefore, the human race army was not facing much pressure at the moment. It could even be said that the Black Ink clan no longer considered the human army a worthy opponent. As long as the royal lords defeated Zhang Ruoxi, the humans would be helpless to resist when they finally turned around to deal with them. The Black Ink clan's underestimation was the reason the human race army successfully broke out of the encirclement. The strange movements of the human race army naturally caught the attention of many masters from the Black Ink clan. They might not know what the human race army was planning, but they had finally pushed Zhang Ruoxi to the brink of desperation after sacrificing so many of their masters. How could they allow for any external interference at this time? Dozens of royal lords immediately turned around and charged towards the human race army, while a massive number of Black Ink clan soldiers pursued the humans from the rear. Under these circumstances, the human race army would be facing enemies from the front and back if they did not quickly escape the besiegement of the royal lords. Only an extremely disastrous ending awaited them if they were engulfed by the enemy in their current state. When the royal lords took action, Zhang Ruoxi also made her move. She attempted to slash her way through the heavy blockade and join the human race army. However, numerous masters from the Black Ink clan fearlessly threw themselves at her to obstruct her path. They did not seem to hesitate even though their lives were on the line. Hence, she was successfully prevented from escaping for some time. By this time, Zhang Ruoxi was exhausted beyond her limits. After she departed from the chaotic dead territory, she rushed to the battlefield without delay. Once she arrived, she not only fought countless royal lords, but she also expended her strength to open the void corridor that connected to the chaotic dead territory. Afterwards, she delved into the depths of the opening in the primordial heaven source grand restriction, and wreaked havoc there for some time before she engaged Mo in an intense battle. It could be said that she had not rested at all since she stepped foot on the battlefield. She had simply been moving from battle to battle without any breaks in between. Therefore, she could only bring out 70% of her full strength. The most obvious change was her combat effectiveness. She used to be able to kill a royal lord in one blow, but now it took her multiple strikes to kill one. It would not be easy for her to join up with the human race army when she was being besieged by so many masters from all directions. At this moment, a figure abruptly soared into the sky. Raising both hands high, he clenched his fists and roared furiously, "Burn!" The 2 marks on his clenched fists flashed with a blinding light. 7 figures rushed into the sky behind him. Every one of them also had mysterious marks shining brightly on the backs of their hands. These marks indicated that these people were blessed by the sun's burning light and moon's serene glimmer. Yang Kai had brought these marks from the chaotic dead territory and bestowed them to 10 divine spirits many years ago. These divine spirits had been scattered throughout the various battlefields. Thanks to the great sun and moon marks in their possession, they could mobilize and transform the power of the yellow and blue crystals into purifying light. Consequently, they were essential to the logistical support of the human race army. It was precisely thanks to this method that the threat of the Black Ink strength to the human race was greatly reduced. The purifying Black Ink pills alone would not have been enough otherwise. Even before this incident, these divine spirits had been mobilizing the power of the great sun and moon marks constantly during the war. So many small stone race soldiers had died on the battlefield that they could easily summon a large burst of the purifying light without much effort. In this way they could not only purify the battlefield, but they could also cause great damage to the Black Ink clan, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. When the human race army charged in Zhang Ruoxi's direction, the divine spirits with the great sun and moon marks quickly activated the marks on the backs of their hands under Yang Zhao's leadership. Zhang Ruoxi, who was besieged by countless royal lords, saw the scene from a distance and immediately understood their plan. A smile appeared on her exhausted face. Feeling the strength of the people around her, she knew she was not fighting alone. It was just that she had never even contemplated what they were about to attempt, much less tested it, so she did not know if she would succeed. "Seniors, please assist me." Closing her eyes, she gripped the Heaven's Order sword tightly with both hands and pleaded. The sighs of Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan sounded in unison, but they did not refuse her. In the next moment, the wings behind Zhang Ruoxi's back glowed in 2-colored light. When she opened her eyes, the color of her eyes had also changed. One eye was yellow and the other eye was blue. It was a strange sight to behold. At the same time, with Yang Xiao in the lead, the 2 marks on the backs of the hands of the divine spirits abruptly burst forth and transformed into a 2-colored light that enveloped their bodies as a powerful divine sense simultaneously penetrated their knowledge seas. It was the divine senses of the burning light and serene glimmer. Under normal circumstances, they would never allow any external divine sense to encroach on their minds. However, they abandoned all defenses at this moment and allowed the divine sense to link with their own. One by one, the eyes of the divine spirits went blank as though they had lost themselves. "Link!" Zhang Ruoxi cried out. With herself as the source point, Various rays of aura instantly connected with each other across the distance and became closely intertwined. Her aura, which had initially begun to dwindle, suddenly surged and shook the surrounding void. The royal lords paled at the sight. Success! Relief washed over Mi Jingluan at the sight. This was Yang Zhao's suggestion. When the 8 personal guards shattered to pieces, it became impossible for Zhang Ruoxi to form a battle formation. She would never escape from the besiegement of so many masters from the Black Ink clan in her current condition, so it was only a matter of time before she suffered a tragic death. The Black Ink clan would be free to attack the human race army once Zhang Ruoxi died, which would undoubtedly result in the human race's defeat. Be that as it may, the human race army had no extra resources to spare in their current condition. The very idea of helping Zhang Ruoxi was nothing more than a fool's dream unless somebody could form a new 9 palaces formation with her. Although they had enough Ninth Order masters to fulfill the requirements to form a 9 palaces formation, it was not easy for them to actually pull off such a feat even if 8 Ninth Order masters were sent to help Zhang Ruoxi. Even if they trusted her wholeheartedly, it would be impossible for them to join forces and form a 9 palaces formation in such a short time. After all, this was not solely a matter of trust but also of compatibility. That was why Yang Xiao had suggested attempting to form the 9 palaces formation with the divine spirits who owned the great sun and moon marks instead. He believed that they might achieve a pleasantly surprising result. The great sun and moon marks were derived from the burning light and serene glimmer sources. Since Zhang Ruoxi had united the power of yin and yang with her bloodline, her body was brimming with the source strength of the burning light and serene glimmer. In other words, to her, Yang Xiao and the other divine spirits should not be that much different from her destroyed small stone race personal guard. At this point, their only option was to attempt this unprecedented feat. If they succeeded, then it would be a joyous success. If they failed, then there was nothing that could be done regardless. In any case, they would only know the result after they made the attempt. For that reason, Mi Jingluan ordered the entire human army to charge out and separate from the ranks of the small stone race army. It was their final desperate attempt to overturn their current predicament. If this plan failed, they would not only fail to rescue Zhang Ruoxi, but also face the imminent destruction of the human race army. Fortunately, the plan had worked. When the power of the 9 palaces formation enveloped the enormous void, Mi Jingluan smiled from the bottom of his heart. Dozens of royal lords were currently on the way to intercept the human race army, and bombarded them with a storm of powerful secret techniques before they even arrived. The defenses of the human race army could be said to have fallen apart at this moment, with only the Ninth Order masters being capable of blocking such an onslaught. Just as the Ninth Order masters were confronting the royal lords though, the hollow-eyed divine spirits charged forward with Yang Xiao in the lead. Every one of these divine spirits was enveloped in a blue and yellow light, and the aura surrounding them was so strong that the void shuddered in their presence. Yang Xiao headed straight towards one of the royal lords, and under that royal lord's astonished gaze, Yang Xiao slammed his fist forward. Half of the royal lord's body instantly exploded into mist when the punch landed. Meanwhile, Yang Xiao did not stop his movements and charged towards the second royal lord with a blank expression on his face. Yang Xiao was an ancient dragon, equivalent to a peak 8th Order master. Naturally, killing a royal lord in one blow was the result of the battle formation and not his own strength. It was a pity that the attack cost him a heavy price. The arm he used to punch the royal lord became twisted and broke, with blood pouring out of it from multiple wounds. Most of the divine spirits displayed similar performances. With no leader coordinating their movements, the royal lords blocking the divine spirits were swiftly cut down without much resistance. The remaining royal lords were frightened and quickly moved aside to open up a path. Such a feat was only possible because Yang Xiao and the others were divine spirits. The physical body of each divine spirit was extremely powerful in comparison to any other existence. If they were ordinary 8th Order human masters who had supported Zhang Ruoxi in this battle formation instead, their bodies would not have been able to withstand the backlash from launching such powerful attacks. Martial Peak, Chapter 5991, Reappearance of the 9 Palaces Formation. The 8 divine spirits broke through the heavy blockade of the royal lords and headed straight towards Zhang Ruoxi, who did not remain idle either. At this moment, she released a powerful burst of energy and tore through the besiegement of the royal lords to join the divine spirits as soon as possible. With the power of the new Nine Palaces formation, the original crisis that loomed over her was resolved in an instant. When Zhang Ruoxi united with the 8 divine spirits, a huge change took place in the overall situation. The human race army escorting the divine spirits did not stop forging ahead, and instead acted like a raging current that swept across the void in a wide arc before returning to their original battlefield via a huge detour. With tremendous help from the small stone race army, the two armies reunited once more and resumed their endless battle against the Black Ink clan army. At this point, Pure Yang Pass was completely destroyed and the suppressing Black Ink fortress had been shattered. Most of the warships were also gone with just a few barely surviving. The human race no longer had many external aids to rely upon at this last juncture of the war. The only thing they had left was the barrier of flesh and blood. In the void, Zhang Ruoxi had united with the 8 divine spirits. She gripped the Heaven's Order sword tightly with both hands. Surrounded by many royal lords in all directions, she murmured softly under her breath, "We won't have much time." The strength of the 8 divine spirits could not compare with her personal guard. So not only would forcefully forming a battle formation cause immense damage to the bodies of the divine spirits, but even the powerful divine sense of the burning light and serene glimmer which directed their auras caused hidden dangers. If Zhang Ruoxi could not end the battle as soon as possible, the divine spirits who joined up with her would eventually explode. Even if their physical bodies somehow managed to endure, their souls might be extinguished. What's more, Yang Xiao and Su Yan were among the 8 divine spirits. These two were Yang Kai's important family members. She could not lose this fight. Even setting aside the weakness of the divine spirits, Zhang Ruoxi could hardly last for much longer. At this very moment, she was burning the Heaven's Order bloodline in her body, just to forcefully maintain a balance between the power of yin and yang, despite Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan doing everything they could to assist her. It would not be long before the balance would be broken and her bloodline was burned out entirely. Forcing down her worries, Zhang Ruoxi lifted her sword and boldly charged towards her enemies, followed closely by the 8 divine spirits. The sudden burst of power left the royal lords scrambling in a panic. One after another, the royal lords fell prey to Zhang Ruoxi's sword, but when she finally broke through the encirclement, she did not escape. On the contrary, she turned around and led the divine spirits to attack once more. Thanks to the 9 Palaces formation which was formed with Zhang Ruoxi as the core and the 8 divine spirits as the foundation, she had once more become an unstoppable blade that repeatedly swept across the battlefield. Every charge resulted in the deaths of many royal lords. 10, 20, 30, 50. Zhang Ruoxi's vision went blurry, and she could not see the scenery in front of her clearly. Furthermore, the power of yin and yang in her body was faintly showing signs of imbalance. Even so, she did not stop. She had no choice but to charge forward and swing her sword. Meanwhile, the 8 divine spirits following behind her were covered in blood. After all, the 9 Palaces formation placed an extremely heavy burden on their bodies. The only reason they could maintain the formation at all was because the divine spirits had relinquished all control over their own bodies and fully surrendered themselves to become part of the battle formation. By doing so, even with their bodies on the verge of collapse, they managed to persist. The bones in Yang Zhao's arms had been shattered to pieces. Meanwhile, Su Yan's internal organs were crushed. She was also bleeding from her 7 orifices, which made her appearance extremely ghastly. After fighting for some time, Zhang Ruoxi suddenly felt a change in the battle formation. One pillar of the foundation had failed. Thus, she hastily readjusted the battle formation. The 9 Palaces formation became the 8 Trigrams formation. Unable to withstand the pressure of the battle formation any longer, one of the divine spirits fighting behind her had exploded and died. The death distressed her greatly, causing a sharp stab of pain in her heart. Nevertheless, she did not dare to check the identity of the deceased divine spirit. She could only persist and swing her sword to cut down her enemies. At a certain point, Zhang Ruoxi could no longer detect any royal lords around her. She looked around with bleary eyes, but no matter where she looked, she could find none of the masters who had previously besieged her. She had cut down all 200 royal lords. When the realization struck her, she nearly burst into tears. Her entire body was covered in countless wounds, and the fresh blood that drenched her entire body had dyed what was left of her robes scarlet. She had not been too concerned when she teamed up with her personal guard to form the battle formation. After all, her personal guard each had the strength of a ninth-order master. Not to mention their bodies were robust. They were capable of withstanding the pressure of the battle formation for an extended time. However, there were too many things to worry about when she entered a battle formation with the divine spirits. There were times when she could not dodge the attacks from the royal lords, so she was forced to bear the brunt of these attacks or the divine spirits would be killed instead. In this way, she had taken more damage in this shot battle than in all her previous fights. It was not until this moment that she had the time to check on the condition of the divine spirits. 8 divine spirits had forced their way through the enemy blockade to help her, but only 3 remained behind her. Even so, the aura of these 3 was weak and unstable, like they could be snuffed out at any moment. Although she was heartbroken by the losses, Zhang Ruoxi was relieved to see that Yang Xiao and Su Yan had survived. The Dragon Clan and Phoenix Clan were certainly worthy of being the strongest among the divine spirits. Besides, both Yang Xiao and Su Yan had been at the peak of their cultivation for a long time, which was another reason why they managed to persist until the end. Seniors, please release the battle formation, Zhang Ruoxi anxiously urged. Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan immediately released control over their source strength at the same time. In the next moment, the 3 hollow-eyed divine spirits regained consciousness. 3 muffled groans of pain sounded in unison. They had not been aware of their states when their consciousness had been taken over, but a wave of boundless agony washed over them when their consciousness was restored. All the bones in Yang Xiao's body made cracking sounds as he revealed his true form without hesitation. Changing into his dragon form would give him greater endurance against his wounds. The injuries might be fatal to his human form, but the same degree of injuries would only be considered critical in his dragon form. Still, his 90,000-meter-long ancient dragon form was tattered and covered in terrible wounds. Moreover, the aura around him was weak and unstable. Similarly, the other divine spirit revealed his true form. He was a Pai Xiu who had survived for innumerable years, and was thus an old veteran with an incredibly solid foundation. Neither of these 2 suffered from major problems. Although they were very heavily wounded, their lives were not in danger. Then Zhang Ruoxi turned to look at Su Yan, and her eyes immediately widened in horror at the sight. Su Yan's body was breaking apart and crumbling into dust. Like Yang Kai, she was originally part of the human race and only became part divine spirit after obtaining her phoenix source. She had repeatedly entered the phoenix nest to cultivate over the years, and in the end, she completely integrated the 3rd-generation Phoenix Empress source to become a pure-blood member of the Phoenix clan. Be that as it may, her foundation and physique were still inferior compared to someone born and raised in the Phoenix clan. Yang Xiao and Pai Xiu just barely survived the ordeal, but Su Yan failed to pull through until the end. Yang Xiao evidently noticed Su Yan's condition because he released a sorrowful wail at the sight. Su Yan, who was covered in various wounds, looked down at her hands which were beginning to disintegrate into ash. A look of remembrance flashed through her eyes at the sight. Raising her head once more, she looked at the weeping Zhang Ruoxi and smiled. Please don't blame yourself. The Phoenix clan has our Phoenix flame. There might be a chance for me to revive from death, but if I fail, please pass a message to him for me. Tell him that meeting him was the greatest blessing in my life. Zhang Ruoxi nodded desperately, her tears streaming down her face uncontrollably. The Phoenix clan's Phoenix flame was also known as the Flame of Rebirth. It was only natural for Su Yan and Zhang Ruoxi to know about such things. Unfortunately, the Flame of Rebirth did not always succeed. It was simply a possibility of rebirth. After all, the Phoenix clan would be truly immortal if their rebirth succeeded in every attempt. If the Flame of Rebirth failed, their Phoenix source would return to the Phoenix nest and be reborn as a new member of the Phoenix clan. Martial Peak Chapter 5992, The Hope of the Divine Spirits. After the battle, Zhang Ruoxi's crisis was resolved. Unfortunately, the price of her rescue was not small. 5 out of the 8 divine spirits who came to help her had lost their lives in battle. Only 3 of them had survived to the end. Be that as it may, Su Yan had already set one foot across the gates of death. After Su Yan finished speaking to Zhang Ruoxi, her entire body dissolved into tiny points of fluorescent light, which did not dissipate into the void but condensed into a dim blue flame instead. It was her Phoenix flame, as well as her Phoenix source. It was the inheritance she received from the third-generation Phoenix Empress, who lived back in the late ancient era. Zhang Ruoxi anxiously stared at the small ball of fire. The phoenix flame flickered, going from light to dark. In just a short moment, the dim blue phoenix flame became dim and dull, as though it would be extinguished in the next moment. Despite facing hundreds of royal lords without the slightest change in her expression, Zhang Ruoxi now was as pale as a sheet. Moreover, her body was enveloped in a layer of boundless chill. The extinguishment of the phoenix flame would mean that Su Yan was gone forever. Even if the phoenix flame returned to the phoenix nest and produced another member of the phoenix clan, that person would no longer be Su Yan. Oi! Hey! Big Brother Huang's voice abruptly sounded in Zhang Ruoxi's mind, causing her to snap back to her senses. Grab that ball of fire! Big Brother Huang urgently urged. Although Zhang Ruoxi did not know what Big Brother Huang was planning, she quickly did as she was told. She stepped forward and wrapped her hands around the weakened flame. In the next moment, she clearly sensed Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan pouring power from their sources into the phoenix flame. She immediately understood their plan and hurriedly activated her Heaven's Order bloodline to help balance the flow and harmonize their power. The flame that was on the verge of being snuffed out slowly stabilized. In addition, faint hues of yellow and blue gradually seeped into the flame. The hues of yellow and blue were none other than the source strength of the burning light and serene glimmer. Shortly after the primordial light left its birthplace, the power of yin and yang were split from it. The primordial light later collided with the divine spirit ancestral land, and the dissipated energy transformed into the various divine spirits. In the end, its remaining essence turned into a woman bearing the Heaven's Order bloodline. Strictly speaking, the burning light and the serene glimmer originated from the same source as all divine spirits. Although they could be classified as divine spirits, they were different from ordinary divine spirits. That was because they were the first to split from the primordial light. Be it in terms of the purity or strength of their source, ordinary divine spirits were simply incomparable to the burning light and serene glimmer. Even the dragons and phoenixes were no exception in this regard. Therefore, the pure source strength of the burning light and serene glimmer was a great supplement to the divine spirits. Their source strength could help in the refinement of a divine spirit source and enhance the bloodline of these divine spirits. Yang Kai was the best example of this. When Yang Kai first met Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan, he had only just become a 10,000-meter-long grand dragon, but after receiving a gift of source strength from the two of them, his dragon vein improved at an astonishing pace, allowing him to grow to 20,000 meters in just half a month. What's more, the gift of source strength from Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan was nowhere near exhausted, and had helped Yang Kai several more times over the years, eventually allowing him to become an ancient dragon less than 1,000 years later. This rate of growth for a member of the dragon clan was unheard of in history. At this moment, the same effect took place when they injected their source strength into the phoenix flame. The phoenix flame reacted as though it suddenly received significant nourishment, and began burning brighter and stronger until the small ball of flame gradually resembled a blue-colored great Sunday. Zhang Ruoxi watched the flame intently. Then, she vaguely noticed the figure of a phoenix clan member flying about within the flames. When the burning brightness of the phoenix flame reached a certain point, the blue-colored great sun abruptly expanded and exploded. The sudden turn of events left her dumbfounded. She couldn't help thinking that something extremely awful had happened. However, she immediately revealed an expression of joyous surprise. That was because a clear and striking phoenix cry resounded throughout the void when the blue phoenix flame erupted. It was followed by the unfurling of a giant pair of dazzling wings, then the gradual appearance of a beautiful and graceful figure. Having received help from the source strength of Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan, Su Yan had succeeded in her rebirth. Zhang Ruoxi wept tears of joy. A phoenix's rebirth generally came with great risks. If they failed, they would lose their life on the spot. On the other hand, they would receive immense benefits if they succeeded. That was because the strength of the Phoenix clan members would improve significantly with each rebirth. Not to mention, Su Yan received aid from the source strength of the burning light and serene glimmer during her rebirth. At this moment, her ice phoenix aura radiating from the flame of rebirth was at a height that Su Yan had never been able to achieve in the past. She would not lose even if compared to divine dragon Fu Guang. She was now a divine spirit that was on par with a veteran Ninth Order master. While the divine spirits population was far from their peak back in the primordial era, there was no small number of them nowadays. Nevertheless, Fu Guang was the only living divine spirit who had achieved such a level of power. Naturally, Yang Kai could also be included in this list. The rest of the divine spirits were at most equivalent to peak 8th Order masters. Although these divine spirits were generally stronger than average human race masters at the peak of the 8th Order Open Heaven realm, that did not change the fact that they had yet to reach the highest peak of their strength. Therefore, the Phoenix clan no longer had a designated leader, much less a Phoenix Empress after the death of the former Dragon and Phoenix clan leaders during the battle in the Barren Territory. Only a Phoenix who had reached the realm of 9th Order Masters had the right to command the Phoenix clan and vie for the position of Phoenix Empress. Su Yan had reached the peak of the 8th Order Open Heaven realm. In addition, her Phoenix clan source had reached a realm equivalent to the 8th Order. Having inherited the source of the 3rd generation Phoenix Empress, she was expected to become a Phoenix Empress in the future, if she had enough time to develop and grow. The entire Phoenix clan had placed their hopes in her. Nevertheless, the enhancement of a divine spirit's bloodline and source was extremely difficult. Even though Su Yan repeatedly entered the Phoenix nest to cultivate over the years, she had remained stuck at a bottleneck. She simply could not overcome the bottleneck and advance to the final step. That was until this moment. Su Yan, who was reborn thanks to the flame of rebirth, had finally shattered her bottleneck. Her bloodline had improved significantly, allowing her to advance. She even overcame the shackles of the open heaven realm, which was nothing short of a miracle. Amidst the ringing notes of the phoenix cries, Su Yan, who had transformed into an ice phoenix, gave Zhang Ruoxi a slight nod of acknowledgement. Then she turned around and charged towards the vast battlefield, leaving a long and flickering tail of blue light in her wake. Another phoenix cry sounded a moment later, and a large part of the void froze as a result. Countless black ink clansmen were turned into ice sculptures that maintained their final appearance before their deaths, drifting aimlessly in the void. Even the surviving royal lords were too intimidated by the icy aura to step forward and challenge this new enemy. They were certain that things would not end well for them if they were touched by that kind of power. At the same time, the enormous black ink cloud that had condensed above the battlefield was also enveloped in huge ice crystals. One after another, phoenix cries sounded from various directions across the battlefield. It was the Phoenix clan welcoming their newly crowned empress. Their sonorous cries pierced through space itself, sounding a horn of counterattack. Ho! A high-pitched dragon roar sounded next. Zhang Ruoxi, who finally managed to collect her emotions, looked up into the void and saw Yang Xiao writhing around in his dragon form. The power of the dragon vein in his body fluctuated wildly, showing faint signs that he was about to break through. Moreover, he was not the only one. Pai Xiao, the final survivor, was also exhibiting similar signs. The previous battle was an arduous struggle that they had never experienced before. Although their consciousnesses had been dormant at the time, their bodies did not forget the details of the battle. The enormous pressure had brought them closer to the limits of their bloodline. Nonetheless, what truly allowed them to break through their limits was the pure source strength of the burning light and serene glimmer which had poured into them. Both Yang Xiao and Pai Xiao were bearers of the great sun and moon marks, which were the manifestation of a piece of the burning light and serene glimmer source. In order to successfully form the 9 palaces formation with Zhang Ruoxi, Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan had integrated their marks into the divine spirits and assumed control over their bodies. Hence, all 8 of the divine spirits received the blessing of the burning light and the serene glimmer source strength, which stimulated the growth of their bloodline greatly. The benefits that they obtained after surviving their near-death experience were unimaginable. The power of Yang Xiao's dragon vein boiled. He roared endlessly, filled with the faint realization that he had touched up the barrier that hindered his growth. As long as he could break through this barrier, he would be able to successfully become a divine dragon. He had been under tremendous mental pressure ever since he returned from the universe furnace. Although Yang Shui had advanced to the 9th order, he remained stuck as an ancient dragon. Consequently, there were many occasions in which they could no longer fight side by side with each other. The main reason was the difference in their strengths, which caused him to become a burden for Yang Shui. For this reason, Yang Xiao had been desperately trying to improve his bloodline. He had asked Fu Guang for advice on countless occasions, But the path to becoming a divine dragon was not easy. Even with Fu Guang's careful guidance, he simply could not find a way to overcome his bottleneck. The number of people in each generation of the dragon clan who could successfully advance to become divine dragons could always be counted on one hand. Most of the time the dragon clan had only one divine dragon, and even at the peak of the dragon clan, there had only been a total of 3 divine dragons. At this moment Yang Xiao could almost see his breakthrough on the horizon. He knew that this might be his opportunity to overcome his bottleneck. Therefore, he could not afford to miss it. In order to break through the shackles of his bloodline, he was willing to sacrifice everything. The same was true for Pai Xiao. While the dragon and phoenix clans generally had the protection of a dragon emperor or a phoenix empress in each generation, no equivalent divine spirit had appeared among the rest of the divine spirits since the end of the primordial era. The primordial era had been the turning point for the divine spirits, who lost the blessings of the heavens and earned the malice of the universe instead. During the primordial era, the divine spirits had been the favored of the heavens. They were unrestrained in their actions, doing whatever they wanted without any fear or scruples. Their reign came to an end after countless years of warring against each other for dominance, and they were eventually supplanted by the monster race. By that point, countless divine spirits had perished. Afterwards, the blessing and favor of the heavens gradually shifted to the monster race. Innumerable divine spirits were again wiped out during the early ancient era when the monster race ruled, and the number of divine spirits who survived was less than 1% of their numbers at their peak. If the monster race had continued to reign over the universe, the divine spirits would have gone extinct completely. Even the dragon and phoenix clans would not be an exception. What happened next was amusing indeed. The monster race ultimately walked down the same path as the divine spirits after they overthrew the reign of the divine spirits. Once again, the blessing and favor of the heavens shifted, now falling upon the human race. It was for that reason that the divine spirits cooperated with the human race. By taking shelter under the wings of the human race, they managed to preserve the lives of the surviving divine spirits until today. In short, the divine spirits lost the favor of the heavens after the primordial era, and could no longer reproduce the glory of their ancestors. The greatest sign of their decline was the huge reduction in the number of divine spirits that could touch what was equivalent to the ninth order open heaven realm. Only those born in the Dragon Clan and Phoenix Clan had produced such masters after the primordial era. It had to be said that every single divine spirit clan had the protection of their respective ninth order divine spirits during the primordial era. In fact, their numbers could range from a few to several dozen in each divine spirit clan back then. Countless eons had passed since then, and at this moment, there was a Pai Xiao who finally experienced the opportunity to overcome the shackles of his bloodline on this vast battlefield. He was ecstatic beyond imagination. Forcefully enduring the damage caused by his injuries, he pushed his bloodline power with reckless abandon. The vitality surrounding his body became more and more intense as time passed. All over the battlefield, the divine spirits revealed their true bodies and roared in excitement. If Su Yan's transformation was a joyous event for the Phoenix Clan, then Pai Xiao's current state was a joyous event for all the divine spirits. Regardless of whether he succeeded in overcoming his bottleneck or not, he had already given the other divine spirits a glimpse of hope. Martial Peak, Chapter 5993, The Mighty Current of the Dragon Pool. On the main battlefield, the difficult situation faced by the Allied army had been greatly eased, all thanks to Zhang Ruoxi. The Black Ink clan had paid an exorbitant price to take down Zhang Ruoxi, resulting in the loss of hundreds of royal lords and yielding less than desirable results. If the human race army had not desperately escorted the 8 divine spirits to aid her at the last moment, the Black Ink clan's plans to kill Zhang Ruoxi would most likely have succeeded, and once she was dead, there would no longer be anybody on the battlefield with sufficient strength to pose a threat to the Black Ink clan. At that moment, the 2 giant spirit gods were trapped by over 100 royal lords. They were too busy fending for themselves to spare any energy to rescue the human race army. Fortunately, Zhang Ruoxi eventually won the battle. The price of her victory was the lives of 5 divine spirits, but all the royal lords surrounding and besieging her had been eliminated in exchange. Furthermore, Su Yan had successfully been crowned as the Phoenix Empress. The enormous figure of the Ice Phoenix radiated with a bone-chilling cold that froze everything in its wake. Even space itself was no exception. Be that as it may, the situation remained bleak. The Black Ink clan had twice as many troops as the Allied army, which gave them a numerical advantage that was difficult to overcome. Furthermore, not all of the royal lords had been eliminated in the skirmish with Zhang Ruoxi. The enemy had preserved enough royal lords to maintain the situation on the main battlefield, despite their attempt to kill Zhang Ruoxi. At this moment, the difference in strength between the two sides had not shrunk, but instead increased significantly. The main cause for this was that the small stone race died at a much faster rate than the Black Ink clan. Su Yan's rebirth had only managed to help stabilize the situation by a small margin. The human race army would need an even greater injection of strength to prevent things from deteriorating, much less win the battle. A continuous wave of dragon roars reverberated throughout the void. When the power of Yang Zhao's dragon vein reached a certain limit, the aura of the divine dragon erupted. Then the body of a 100,000-meter-long white dragon emerged, its enormous dragon head rising high above, overlooking all living creatures from a lofty height. Yang Xiao had succeeded in ascending to the realm of divine dragon. At the same time, the aura of a ninth-order divine spirit radiated from Pai Xiao. 8 divine spirits had stepped forward to help Zhang Ruoxi, and though 5 had died in battle, the remaining 3 had successfully overcome their respective shackles and risen to greater heights. It was important to note that the difference in impact a ninth-order divine spirit, like Pai Xiao, could play on the battlefield compared to a newly advanced ninth-order human master was enormous. That was because the divine spirits were inherently stronger than ninth-order humans by a large margin. As soon as Yang Xiao and Pai Xiao joined forces and charged into the battlefield, a large swath was cut into the ranks of the Black Ink clan army. The overwhelming aura of the divine spirits flooded the void, causing countless Black Ink clan soldiers to perish. In the distant void, another silver divine dragon was rampaging across the battlefield. His entire body was drenched in blood, and many of his tough dragon scales had been torn or blasted off. This silver divine dragon was none other than Fu Guang. Regardless of his immense strength, he was bound to sustain injuries in such a chaotic and intense battlefield. When Fu Guang saw Yang Xiao charging into the battlefield after becoming a divine dragon, he immediately rushed over towards him. At the same time, a series of dragon roars were exchanged between them, as though they were communicating with each other. It did not take long before Yang Xiao seemed to understand the situation, and he quickly sliced a bloody path through his enemies to approach Fu Guang. A short while later, the 2 divine dragons gathered at the same place. In terms of size alone, Fu Guang was undoubtedly larger than Yang Xiao. This was only natural as Fu Guang had been a divine dragon for a much longer time. The 2 behemoths began to draw upon the power of their dragon veins, causing their vitality to surge and boil within them. That was not all. They also began to spin in circles at a high speed, with their bodies connected together from end to end. In the beginning, their figures could still be seen. However, they soon blurred into a rapidly rotating blur. Something could vaguely be seen amidst the rapidly spinning circle of light, as though being summoned into existence. Many of the royal lords in the Black Ink clan army couldn't help feeling uncomfortable at the sight. Although they did not know what the 2 divine dragons were attempting, they knew that their actions would undoubtedly be detrimental to the Black Ink clan. They had to stop the divine dragons at all costs. Hence, more than a dozen royal lords immediately rushed towards the 2 divine dragons from various directions. Despite their efforts, though, another shocking scene entered their eyes before they could approach the divine dragons. Under the joint efforts of the 2 divine dragons, a large amount of turbid liquid suddenly gushed out from the dazzling circle of light. The unknown liquid splattered across the void like a spray of mist from a mountain spring, covering everything around them. Then a torrent of water emerged and swept out in all directions. Many of the divine spirits who knew what was happening couldn't help feeling moved by the scene before them. They knew that the Dragon Clan had brought out their strongest trump card in order to obtain victory in this war. The torrent gushing into the void without restraint was clearly the waters from the Dragon Pool. The Phoenix Clan had the Phoenix Nest, while the Dragon Clan had the Dragon Pool. These were the foundations of their respective clans. When the Phoenix Clan mobilized the power of the Phoenix Nest against their enemies, the Dragon Clan had not unleashed the power of the Dragon Pool. It was not that the Dragon Clan did not want to bring out their trump card, but rather that they lacked the ability to perform such a feat under normal circumstances. The act of summoning the dragon pool would have required various complicated rituals in addition to the concerted efforts of many Dragon Clan members. Unfortunately, the Dragon Clan simply could not afford the time and energy to perform such intricate rites on such a crisis-ridden battlefield. That was the case until Yang Xiao became a divine dragon. With Fu Guang's cooperation, the two divine dragons joined hands and forcibly summoned the dragon pool to the battlefield. The dragon pool was the foundation of the Dragon Clan. After all, the existence of the dragon pool was the prerequisite for the Dragon Clan to produce endless descendants. Not to mention, the power of the dragon pool was diligently accumulated over countless generations of the Dragon Clan. Regardless of whether the war would end in victory or defeat today, the Dragon Clan would inevitably suffer unimaginable losses by summoning the dragon pool on such a chaotic battlefield. It would be impossible to restore the lost energy without several hundreds of thousands of years of recuperation. Nevertheless, there was no denying that the effects of summoning the dragon pool were remarkable. The waters of the dragon pool turned into a raging torrent that swept out in all directions, and the Black Ink Clan soldiers caught within this flood instantly perished. The power of the dragon pool was an unstoppable force. If a dragon bearing the Dragon Clan bloodline came into contact with the dragon pool's waters, they would be able to enhance their bloodline and increase their strength. On the contrary, the waters of the dragon pool were a lethal poison to living creatures without the power of a dragon vein in their bodies. Everywhere the mighty current flowed, death followed. Even one of the royal lords rushing towards the two divine dragons who accidentally got caught in the current only managed to struggle for a few breaths before he dissolved into the rampaging waters. It was a grand display of the terrifying power within the mighty current of the dragon pool. Needless to say, the current did not pose any threat to beings like the royal lords and the territory lords as long as they remained on guard. The power emanating from the dragon pool might be impressive, but powerful masters only needed to avoid the waters by a certain margin to remain unaffected. However, it was never Fu Guang's intention to target the enemy masters when he joined forces with Yang Xiao to summon the dragon pool. His goal had always been the Black Ink Clan army. The royal lords and the territory lords could easily dodge the raging currents, but the Black Ink Clan soldiers weaker than the territory lords were not so capable. Therefore, the troops of the Black Ink Clan army were now perishing in droves. Some small stone race members fighting the Black Ink Clan army were also caught in the raging torrent. But this couldn't be helped. Although Fu Guang had done his best to summon the dragon pool in an area where only the Black Ink Clan was heavily concentrated, he could not exert fine control over the direction in which the mighty current of the dragon pool would flow. Hence, accidental injuries among friendly troops was inevitable. What shocked him though was that the small stone race members caught in the raging torrent of the dragon pool did not lose their lives. On the contrary, they simply struggled in the current for some time before they quickly rushed out and resumed fighting. After pondering on it for a moment though, Fu Guang realized what had happened. These small stone race soldiers might be simple-minded, but their bodies contained a significant amount of power from the burning light and serene glimmer. Even if the power of the dragon pool was both ancient and pure, it was still incomparable to the original powers of Yin and Yang born alongside the universe. The realization completely relieved Fu Guang of his worries. With hindsight, he had to admit that summoning the dragon pool at such a perilous juncture had been a stroke of genius. Following the raging torrent that swept out in all directions, the Black Ink Clan army suffered enormous losses, completely eliminating the numerical advantage they originally held. On the other hand, the human race army was small in number and extremely agile in their movements. Hence, it was not difficult for them to avoid the mighty current under Mi Jingluan's command. As for the small stone race, only their formations were scattered by the impact while they did not suffer any actual casualties. After a while, the dragon pool vanished without a trace. The release of the waters that the dragon pool had accumulated over countless eons instantly changed the entire situation on the battlefield. It was finally time for a counterattack of the allied army of the human and the small stone races. Among the remaining Black Ink Clan army, all the royal lords wore solemn expressions on their faces. They simply could not understand this sudden turn of events. How did the Black Ink Clan, who should have had an absolute numerical advantage, end up in such dire condition all of a sudden? Without sufficient numerical advantage, It was impossible for the Black Ink clan to be a match for the allied army of the human race and the small stone race. To make matters worse, that terrifying woman was also beginning to take action again. After the three divine spirits advanced to the Ninth Order in quick succession, they immediately charged into the battlefield to resolve the most critical crises. Zhang Ruoshi finally had the chance to catch her breath as a result. She had watched the entire chain of events unfolding before her, beginning with the dragon pool's summoning, the raging current sweeping out across the battlefield, and finally, the Black Ink clan soldiers being washed away and vanishing from existence. Tightening her grip around the Heaven's Order sword, she murmured under her breath, "Seniors, I'm heading into battle." Big Brother Huang sighed softly, like he wanted to make a comment, but in the end, he said nothing and silently cooperated with Big Sister Lan to help Zhang Ruoshi maintain the balance of power in her body. The Heaven's Order bloodline burned once more, and the wings behind Zhang Ruoshi's back glowed with a blue and yellow hue. She charged into the battlefield without hesitation, aiming directly at the royal lords besieging Ada and Aer. At this moment, the pressure faced by the allied army on the main battlefield was not that serious. In fact, they were beginning to gain the upper hand. That was why Zhang Ruoshi did not head for the main battlefield. She would not last much longer in battle, so there was no point in slaughtering some miscellaneous Black Ink clan troops with what little time she had left. It was undoubtedly more cost-efficient to spend her limited strength slaughtering some royal lords instead. Besides, Ada and Aer would be freed as long as she killed enough royal lords. The allied army of the human race and the small stone race would also receive the support of the two giant spirit gods if she succeeded, which might be more effective than providing support by herself. In a flash of yellow and blue, Zhang Ruoshi entered the range of the battle where Ada and Aer were located. At this moment, the royal lords besieging the two giant spirit gods were forced to suffer in silence. The royal lords besieging Zhang Ruoshi had been completely eradicated, and the numerical advantage of the Black Ink clan army on the main battlefield was quickly being overturned. At this point, the human race army had gained the upper hand in this battle. Even if the royal lords fighting the two giant spirit gods wanted to help their comrades, they did not dare to leave their positions easily. They were only able to keep the two giant spirit gods in check by relying on sufficient numbers to harass them. If any of them stepped away from their position, there was a risk that the delicate balance would be broken. Once the two giant spirit gods broke free of their restraints, it would be impossible to pin them down again. However, it was evident that Zhang Ruoshi was coming to help the two giant spirit gods. The royal lords would only be waiting for their imminent deaths if they continued to confront the two giant spirit gods. But showing their backs to these three terrifying enemies would likely just result in them dying faster. At this point, they were stuck in a situation with no hope of escape. Any choice they made would result in a tragic end. Thus, every one of them felt aggrieved and hopeless. Martial Peak, Chapter 5994, Final Burst of Strength. The Black Ink clan's plans to use the royal lords to keep the two giant spirit gods under control failed as soon as Zhang Ruoshi came to the latter's aid. With a flash of her sword, several royal lords perished on the spot. Upon receiving Zhang Ruoshi's assistance, Aer immediately struck out at the same time. He reached out his hand and smacked at a royal lord who was hovering around him. Thanks to Aer's heaven-destroying, earth-shattering strength, the royal lord struck by his blow was instantly smashed to pieces. However, Aer paid a heavy price for his actions. The other royal lords immediately took the opportunity to leave numerous wounds on his body, causing blood and flesh to splatter everywhere. Nevertheless, Aer did not back down. Abandoning all defenses, he switched to a violent offensive instead. As time passed, the royal lords steadily perished. When the number of royal lords besieging Aer dropped to half their original number, the restraints and shackles holding him down could no longer be sustained. Aer was freed. Afterwards, his offensive became increasingly violent and vicious. He worked together with Zhang Ruoshi to quickly slaughter a few more royal lords around him, and as a result, the remaining royal lords could no longer withstand the pressure of the assault and scattered in various directions. Zhang Ruoshi and Aer did not give chase but instead took the opportunity to rush towards Ada. A feeling of doom washed over the royal lords at this sight. Zhang Ruoshi had resolved Aer's predicament by killing off many of the royal lords in the encirclement with her strength alone. And now, she was joining forces with Aer to attack the remaining royal lords. How were they supposed to survive this onslaught? Seeing that the situation was not looking good for them, the royal lords besieging Ada hastily abandoned their opponent and fled in all directions. Ada naturally flew into a rage and chased after the fleeing royal lords, but his movements were slow and clumsy due to his enormous size, so how could he catch up to them? In the end he was stopped by Aer. At this point, Ada had practically lost his ability to think rationally and was acting purely on his instincts. Thus he immediately turned around and punched out. The punch caused Aer to stagger and lose his balance. Fortunately, Ada realized that he had attacked the wrong person after the first strike and his anger immediately vanished. He then stood there awkwardly scratching his head. Among the two giant spirit gods, Ada had always been the most simple-minded. In comparison, there was no doubt that Aer was the smarter one. That was also why Zhang Ruoshi had decided to rescue Aer first when she had the opportunity to help them. "Come with me, we'll beat them up together," Aer told Ada. Then he turned around and charged towards the main battlefield. Ada obediently followed after his brother, quickly forgetting about how he was bullied by the royal lords earlier. On the main battlefield, the appearance of the three Ninth Order divine spirits and the mighty current of the dragon pool had long since leveled the gap in military strength between the two sides. These changes allowed the allied army to gain the upper hand in the battle over time. Moreover, their advantage swiftly widened when the two giant spirit gods came forward to provide support. Everything had gotten better, and the situation was bound to improve even more. On the other side, Zhang Ruoshi was relentlessly chasing down the fleeing royal lords. Her speed was extraordinary. With the slightest flap of her wings, she could ignore the barriers of space and appear before any one of the royal lords in an instant. None survived the slash of the Heaven's Order sword. 1, 2, 10. The royal lords who scattered and fled in all directions had no hope of surviving. On the contrary, their actions simply accelerated the arrival of their demise. When the royal lords finally realized their mistake, they hastily gathered together once more. Unfortunately, there were only some 40 royal lords remaining at this point. These royal lords were originally responsible for surrounding and besieging the giant spirit gods. There had been more than 100 of them in the beginning, but more than half had perished in such a short span of time. Having seen the situation on the main battlefield, they knew that the Black Ink clan had already lost the battle, but so what? As long as they had the Supreme One, they would never be defeated. What they needed to do now was preserve their strength as much as possible. When the Supreme One finished dealing with whatever matters it had to, they would rule the universe under the command of the Supreme One. With these considerations in mind, the royal lords gathered together but did not attack Zhang Ruoshi. They simply waited quietly and assumed a defensive posture. Holding the Heaven's Order sword in both hands, Zhang Ruoshi smiled slightly even though her complexion was as pale as a sheet. Their response perfectly aligned with her desires. If they had scattered and fled in different directions, then she would not have been able to eliminate them all. On the contrary, the fact that they gathered together in one place had certainly saved her the trouble of hunting them down. Needless to say, the situation was also a risk to her. If she failed to handle the situation properly, she would most likely suffer catastrophic consequences. "Come." Zhang Ruoshi exhaled lightly and stabilized the power in her body. When she looked up, the vitality surrounding her began to boil and burn, and she transformed into a stream of light that charged towards the royal lords. This was her last burst of strength, so she had to act swiftly. She had to finish dealing with these royal lords before the situation fell out of control. When the stream of light crashed into the royal lords, various howls of fury resounded. Blood splattered everywhere and dismembered limbs scattered across the void. Under the rain of sword slashes that ruthlessly came pouring down, the royal lords perished one after another. The entire incident seemed to last for only a brief moment, but at the same time there was also a feeling that hundreds of thousands of years had passed in that brief moment. When Zhang Ruoshi finally stopped swinging her sword, the void was littered with the dismembered remains of the royal lords. The few survivors opposite her looked petrified. Those short few moments had deeply instilled the true meaning of despair in their hearts. In the face of absolute might, even royal lords like themselves were as weak as ants. Nevertheless, something unexpected occurred. Under the horrified gazes of the royal lords, Zhang Ruoxi's hands suddenly fell limply to the sides. The vitality that enveloped her body also became extremely weak at this moment. On the other hand, the terrifying aura within her became increasingly intense and unstable. She's at her limits. One of the royal lords yelled in pleasant surprise. The royal lords had extremely keen vision, so they immediately noticed the changes when Zhang Ruoxi showed abnormal symptoms. At this moment, the few surviving royal lords finally glimpsed an opportunity to defeat this woman. Hence, they charged forward without hesitation. A sharp look flashed through Zhang Ruoxi's eyes, and she struggled to lift the Heaven's Order sword up again. Big Brother Huang's anxious shout entered her ears at that moment. "You'll die at this rate." A faint smile appeared on her face, but her hands did not loosen their grip on the sword, instead tightening even more as she answered calmly, "We all have a predestined time." Big Sister Lan called out anxiously, "If you die, Big Brother Huang's and my power will surely go out of control. Are you willing to watch this place turn into another chaotic dead territory?" There was no denying that Big Sister Lan was much better at reading hearts when it came to persuading others. Zhang Ruoxi was not afraid of death. If her death could bring victory to the human race, she would sacrifice herself without a second thought. However, there would be catastrophic consequences if she lost her life here. Without the coordination of the Heaven's Order bloodline, the power of the two ancient supreme beings would definitely spiral out of control. The enormous void would become another chaotic dead territory in an instant. If that were to happen, the Black Ink clan army would surely be eradicated, but unfortunately, the human race army scattered across the battlefield would also be dragged down with them. The human race had been fighting for millions of years just to obtain peace. At this point, they were only one step away from the dream of so many generations. How could Zhang Ruoxi destroy everything at such a critical moment? Martial Peak. Chapter 5995. It's not enough. After a brief hesitation, Zhang Ruoxi abruptly retreated. She no longer dared to carelessly activate the power within her. Therefore, she could only avoid the attacks of the royal lords who were charging forward desperately. Seeing that, the royal lords pursued Zhang Ruoxi even more fiercely than before. Ripples suddenly spread out across the void, and in the next moment, a dark blue ice phoenix wrapped in a bone-chilling cold stepped out from the ripples and shot a blast of icy aura at the royal lords who were pursuing Zhang Ruoxi. The royal lords were startled by the unexpected arrival and quickly dodged. When they raised their heads once more, their hearts ran cold with fear. Following the appearance of the ice phoenix, several other figures stepped out from the ripples. They were none other than the Ninth Order human masters. The allied army had completely seized the initiative on the main battlefield. They marched forward in high spirits, with their overwhelming advantage in battle steadily growing larger. Under such circumstances, the outcome of the battle was no longer in question. Their victory was only a matter of time at this point. It was for that reason that Mi Jingluan immediately sent reinforcements when he noticed Zhang Ruoxi's predicament. For the sake of ensuring Zhang Ruoxi's safety, he did not even hesitate to mobilize Su Yan, who had only just become a Ninth Order divine spirit. After repelling the royal lords who were pursuing Zhang Ruoxi, a flash of light appeared around the ice phoenix. The figure shrank rapidly to reveal Su Yan's appearance. She took a step forward and came to Zhang Ruoxi's side. Grabbing Zhang Ruoxi by the arm, she quickly made a few maneuvers and withdrew from the battlefield. Her next task was to protect Zhang Ruoxi until the battle ended. Once Su Yan retreated from the battlefield with Zhang Ruoxi, the Ninth Order masters promptly found an opponent for themselves and clashed with the surviving royal lords. As time passed, powerful auras were eliminated one after another. The masters from the Black Ink clan suffered heavy casualties, and the Black Ink clan army was steadily being eradicated. The small stone race army also suffered terrible casualties, but even their deaths played a huge role in the battle. From time to time, flashes of dazzling light would burst out across the battlefield. Those flashes were none other than purifying light. Everywhere the light illuminated, Black Ink strength dissipated and Black Ink clansmen howled in agony. The royal lords and territory lords were perishing all over, and this only accelerated with the destruction of the Black Ink clan army. At a certain moment, the last stubborn royal lord was finally eliminated. The remaining human race army looked around and realized that there were no other enemies around. The battle that lasted for several months with almost no time for respite finally ended with the victory of the Allied army. The small stone race army had suffered a heavy price for the victory. At this moment, less than 30% of their original numbers remained. As for the human race army, about 10 million troops remained when the entire human race army assembled together in one place. Even the number of Ninth Order masters had reduced by more than half. Among the Ninth Order masters who lost their lives in battle, most of them were those who advanced recently. Although they managed to break through to the Ninth Order Open Heaven realm, they barely had any time to stabilize and strengthen the foundation. Compared to the veteran Ninth Order masters, their heritage and control over their own strength was undoubtedly weaker by a significant margin. Furthermore, there were also many injured and crippled among the survivors. The price of victory was extremely heavy, but the victory was ultimately worth the sacrifices. A heaven-shattering burst of cheers rang out soon after. The survivors screamed and rejoiced at the top of their voices, reveling in the ecstasy that overflowed from their hearts. Meanwhile, unlike the ordinary soldiers, the higher-ups in the human race army knew that this war was not over. Although they had finally eradicated the entirety of the Black Ink clan that escaped from the primordial heaven source grand restriction, as long as Mo, the source of the Black Ink clan, was still alive, the Black Ink clan could rise once more. Despite fighting for months, Mo had never appeared on the battlefield. Yang Kai had not shown up either. It could be conceived that these two were battling each other somewhere in the depths of the void, and the outcome of their clash would determine the ultimate fate of the universe. Nobody knew the situation in the depths of the void. Zhang Ruoshi had indeed exchanged blows with Mo for a period, but so much time had passed since then that she could no longer judge the situation on the other side. For that reason, the Allied army only took a brief moment to rest and reorganize their formation after their victory. Then they began marching into the depths of the void in hopes of helping Yang Kai. There was only one piece of good news that could be confirmed. Yang Kai was definitely alive. That was because they could sense a series of disturbances that were caused by a battle somewhere deep in the void. Those disturbances could only mean that Yang Kai currently had the capital to exchange blows with Mo. Passing through the site where the primordial heaven source grand restriction was originally located, the human race army was shocked by the sight that greeted their eyes. There were countless black ink nests scattered throughout the void. Moreover, precious high-rank black ink nests could be found everywhere. It was just that there was no sign of activity from any Black Ink clansmen even though there were so many Black Ink nests. Having dispatched all their military strength to the battlefield for the earlier battle, the Black Ink clan had been completely wiped out as a result. These Black Ink nests were nothing more than decorations now. However, what shocked the human race army was not the countless Black Ink nests scattered everywhere, but the gigantic figures dispersed throughout the void. Those figures were none other than Black Ink giant spirit gods. The outcome of the previous battle would have been even harder to determine if the Black Ink clan had dispatched these Black Ink giant spirit gods to the battlefield. In fact, there was a high possibility that the battle would have ended with the defeat of the Allied army. Fortunately, the Black Ink giant spirit gods were soul clones of Mo. So Mo had to inject a strand of his soul into these behemoths to make them move. Without a strand of Mo's soul, these Black Ink giant spirit gods were nothing more than empty shells. There was nothing the Black Ink clan could do about the Black Ink giant spirit gods even if they wanted to mobilize them. After passing through the void where the primordial heaven source grand restriction was previously located, the Allied army increased their pace. However, Mi Jingluan's expression grew increasingly solemn as they steadily marched forward. He originally brought the Allied army with the intention of helping Yang Kai, but he also knew that Mo was extremely powerful. The rumors claimed that Mo had reached the legendary creation realm. Even if the Allied army boasted massive numbers, they might not be of much help to Yang Kai. Be that as it may, he was currently faced with a dilemma. At present, it was no longer a question of whether the Allied army could provide any help to Yang Kai, but whether the Allied army could even continue their forward march under the current circumstances. As they marched forward, the shockwaves from the battle up ahead became increasingly terrifying. Even now, the mere fallout was enough to shake the entire void. The countless ripples that constantly spread out from the depths of the void were powerful enough to warp space despite their origin being beyond the horizon. Mi Jingluan soon realized that the intensity of the battle between Yang Kai and Mo was unprecedented. At this rate, it was evident that the Allied army would not be of any help. That was because they did not even have the qualification to approach the battlefield. If they forced their way forward, they would be crushed by the fallout before they even arrived. After considering the situation for a time, Mi Jingluan made a decisive decision. He ordered the Allied army to remain on standby at their current position. Then, he brought only the masters in or stronger than the Ninth Order with him and resumed their trek to the depths of the void. The small group traveled for some time before the situation on the battlefield finally came into view, but the sight that entered their eyes stopped them cold in their tracks and turned them pale with horror. It did not matter whether they were a Ninth Order master or a Ninth Order divine spirit. Even Ada and Aer were no exception. Yang Kai stood in the void with the azure dragon spear in his hand. There seemed to be a small and slender spirit snake wrapped around the body of the spear. In addition, every thrust of his spear contained a heaven-destroying, earth-shattering force. The spirit snake was the manifestation of his space-time river. He had completely refined and absorbed Mu's space-time river into his body now, and although he was robbed of many benefits by Mo during the process, the benefits he gained had already pushed him to his limits. Hence, the fact that Mo had stolen some of the benefits did not affect the overall situation by much. The stolen benefits had only restored some of Mo's strength at most. The spirit snake wrapped around the azure dragon spear was Yang Kai's space-time river. It was the result he obtained after countless near-death encounters with Mo. The ability to condense the space-time river into this shape undoubtedly indicated that he had complete control over the power of the space-time river. The intensity and ferocity of this battle were something Yang Kai had never experienced before either. The slightest negligence would lead to his death, and he had indeed suffered several near-death experiences because of Mo. It was fortunate that he had always managed to avoid the worst outcome at the last moment. Mo's vicious attacks had allowed Yang Kai to rapidly gain control over the power of his space-time river. He had been no match for Mo in the beginning, but it had only taken him a few days to reach his current mastery. Originally, Yang Kai could only absorb the Tao strengths into his body by force. When he devoured and refined Mu's space-time river, he had swallowed Mu's space-time river whole, and did his best to grasp as much of Mu's last gift as possible. If the Yang Kai from then was compared to a piece of raw ore, then his battles with Mo had been various forms of tempering and refinement. Every application of Tao strengths and every encounter with Mo had gradually increased his control over the power of the space-time river. The rough and ugly ore had been forged into a fine piece of metal now. At this moment, Yang Kai's understanding of the 10,000 Tao strengths had truly reached the peak of enlightenment. The strength he could now exert was no weaker than what Zhang Ruoxi had previously displayed at her peak. Unfortunately, it was still not enough. If he wanted to slaughter Mo, then he had to overcome his limits in the Ninth Order Open Heaven realm and advance into a higher realm. Only then would he have hope of victory. However, his heritage was insufficient. How could Yang Kai easily overcome his limitations under these circumstances? Not even Mu could achieve such a feat. The more perfectly he could control his powers, the more aware Yang Kai became of his shortcomings. He couldn't reach a higher level of the martial Tao in such a short span of time. He would need to spend long years of precipitation and accumulation before he could ascend. Therefore, he sank into a vicious loop. As long as he failed to overcome his limitations, he would not be able to slaughter Mo. If he wanted to break through to a higher realm of the martial Tao, he would require more time. But how could Mo allow him to have enough time to grow and develop? Ever since Yang Kai condensed his space-time river in the universe furnace, he had found his path to the future. It was just that he failed to realize his discovery until Mu pointed it out to him. Although he could now oppose Mo to a certain extent, he knew in his heart that this situation would not last for long. There were times when one simply lacked the necessary strength, and he was bound to become exhausted at some point. Unfortunately, the same could not be said of Mo. Mo was a strange existence that was born when heaven and earth split apart. As long as his source remained intact, his strength would never be depleted. Furthermore, he was supposedly in the creation realm already. Even if more than 30% of his source had been suppressed and sealed, he was still a mighty being in a realm above the open heaven realm. Yang Kai had finally seen the bizarre means of a being in that realm. Black ink strength that permeated the void could be transformed into a royal lord with a single touch from Mo. The ability to create something out of thin air was simply unimaginable. It was truly fortunate that Yang Kai's current strength was extraordinary, So even a royal lord would only pose a minimal threat to him. That was why Mo stopped using such ineffective tactics after a few attempts and decided to fight Yang Kai with his own strength instead. With each vicious exchange of blows, the violent aftermath that spread out in all directions caused the void to shudder and crack. During one of their confrontations, Yang Kai suddenly heard a slight sound coming from deep within his heart. At the same time, a strange sensation was also transmitted from his arm. Looking down at his arm, he couldn't help being shocked by the sight. A crack had appeared on the till now indestructible azure dragon spear. Martial Peak, Chapter 5996, Defeat. The azure dragon spear was given to Yang Kai by Ada when he was still living in the star boundary. In other words, the spear had accompanied him for thousands of years, during which they experienced numerous battles and slaughtered countless enemies together. As the spear was an artifact refined from the body of a divine, its grade was so high that it was practically unmatched. Be that as it may, Mo had managed to cause a crack to appear in such an amazing spear. It was easy to imagine the intensity of this battle. After all, even the body of a divine dragon could not withstand the force of Mo's attacks. After the first crack appeared on the spear, a second and third crack quickly followed. It did not take long before the entire body of the spear was covered in fine cracks. The spear was on the verge of shattering to pieces. When Mo noticed the cracks on the spear, a hint of mockery appeared in his eyes and his attacks became fiercer and fiercer. Yang Kai suppressed the reluctance in his heart and summoned his Tao strengths with all his might. Then he thrust out with his spear. As soon as the violent forces collided with each other, the impact caused his body to freeze for a moment. The spear that had accompanied him for thousands of years simultaneously shattered into a million pieces in his hand. Mo had been waiting for this very opportunity. When the azure dragon spear shattered to pieces, he jumped forward and punched Yang Kai. This punch was meant to become the deciding factor of this battle. He strongly believed that Yang Kai would be forced to avoid his blows after losing his weapon. If that was the case, then he could steadily press forward and gain complete control over the flow of the battle until Yang Kai became powerless to fight back. Contrary to expectations though, Yang Kai did not retreat from the blow even after the azure dragon spear shattered to pieces. The space-time river, which was originally wrapped around the body of the spear, seemed to have gained spirituality and clung tightly to his arms. Facing Mo's attack directly, Yang Kai threw a punch in Mo's direction. The Tao strengths fluctuated violently. At the moment when both forces collided with each other, a powerful impact manifested as a visible halo of light, centered around the two opponents flashed. The halo of light swiftly spread out in all directions. Everywhere the light passed, space shattered and collapsed. It was quickly followed by the appearance of numerous enormous void cracks. The Ninth Order masters who had arrived at the periphery of the battlefield turned pale with fright. Faced with the approaching fallout of the battle, they quickly summoned their strength to defend themselves against the impact. Nevertheless, they were still sent flying. They, who were no longer at their peak strength, were instantly thrown into disarray by the impact. Luckily, the two giant spirit gods stood in front of them and bore the brunt of the shockwave. It was only thanks to the protection of Ada and Air that there were no casualties. Once the effects of the aftermath passed, they couldn't help looking slightly flustered and bitter. They originally came here intending to help Yang Kai. Halfway into the journey, the Allied army was forced to stop at a distance and discontinue their forward march because the troops could not withstand the overwhelming pressure of the battle. At this moment, they were horrified to discover that even Ninth Order masters like themselves could not approach the battlefield. They would be torn apart by the aftermath of such powerful attacks. As things stood, the only ones who could be depended upon were the two giant spirit gods, Ada and Air. Mi Jingluan looked up at the two behemoths and instantly realized that the two giant spirit gods could not be counted on either. The survivors were exhausted after the arduous battle. Even Ada and Air were no exception. While the two giant spirit gods managed to resist the shockwave just now, they were still pushed back significantly by the impact. Under these circumstances, it was impossible for any of them to intervene in the battle. They would only be a burden for Yang Kai if they recklessly charged forward. Mi Jingluan was abruptly struck by a saddening realization. The only thing they could do after coming here was to witness the unique battle with their own eyes. That was an unimaginably heartbreaking truth. When the aftermath fully dissipated, everyone looked towards the battlefield from behind Ada and Air. The scene that greeted them made their hearts tighten with fear. Yang Kai was steadily being pushed back, seemingly at a complete disadvantage. Compared to an ancient entity like Mo, Yang Kai's heritage was simply too shallow. The slightest negligence or careless mistake could become fatal. Waste! During the battle, Mo suddenly yelled in frustration. Yang Kai flew backwards like an arrow released from the bowstring following a vicious strike. The space-time river wrapped around his arm suddenly emerged behind him and he fell into the river, diffusing some of the impacts from the blow. It did not take long before he stepped out of the river once more. His complexion was pale, and a trickle of blood dripped from the corners of his mouth. Mo did not pursue Yang Kai. He simply stared coldly and calmly stated, "My offer from before still stands. Give up your feudal resistance and hand over Mu's inheritance. I guarantee that the human race will have a place to live in the future." Yang Kai turned his head to the side and spat out a mouthful of blood. Then he grinned wickedly, "Kill me. Then you can deal with the human race as you please." Mo closed his eyes gently. When he opened them once more, his murderous intent overflowed. He did not bother to speak again, and his figure abruptly vanished from where he was standing. By the time he reappeared again, he was already standing in front of Yang Kai. The sudden disappearance and reappearance were not a trick of space principles. Rather, his speed had simply reached such an extreme. Yang Kai did not seem surprised by these movements. With a backward grab, the space-time river that was originally flowing behind him transformed into a whip and appeared in his hand. The long whip then lashed out towards Mo. Mo frowned slightly but did not dodge aside. He simply threw a punch instead. The punch struck Yang Kai squarely in the head. The blow made his head arch backwards, and his skull seemed to crack from the impact. He was immediately drenched in blood. Nevertheless, the long whip wrapped around Mo. Standing so close to each other, the blood-drenched Yang Kai grinned at Mo. "I finally caught you." He seemed to have been waiting for this moment. After he finished speaking, he gave the long whip in his hand a sharp flick. The space-time river manifested once more, and the raging currents instantly engulfed the two figures. Before their figures vanished from view, the masters standing in the distance vaguely heard Mo's mocking voice sounding in their ears, "Since you're so eager to die, I will fulfill your wishes." Afterwards, the space-time river that stretched out into the void suddenly boiled and bubbled violently. Meanwhile, the Grand Tao's strengths trembled agitatedly. These were the results of the battle between Yang Kai and Mo in the space-time river. The Ninth Order Open Heaven Realm Masters couldn't help being extremely nervous at the sight. The space-time river was the condensed crystallization of Yang Kai's 10,000 Grand Das. Even if fighting in the space-time river would give him a considerable advantage over his opponent, that was not enough to overcome the fact that Mo's cultivation was in a higher realm than his. Besides, the Ninth Order Open Heaven Realm Masters had seen the previous battle with their own eyes. Under Mo's powerful offensive, Yang Kai could only parry and defend at most. He had no strength to fight back whatsoever. That was the result of the undeniable gap in their strengths. Rashly dragging his enemy into the space-time river was both an opportunity and a danger. If he failed to defeat Mo in the space-time river, then he would not be able to guarantee his own safety in the space-time river. The churning of the river waters became increasingly turbulent. Waves rose and fell, splashing around fiercely. At the same time, countless Tao strengths appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Although the Ninth Order Masters could not see the ongoing battle, they could deduce that Yang Kai was at a disadvantage just by looking at the changes in the space-time river. The situation lasted for several days. The Ninth Order Masters were about to rush forward to help when the churning river suddenly turned calm. With their hearts in their throats, they watched the space-time river intently. They knew that the outcome of the battle had been decided. Mi Jingluan immediately sent a transmission to his companions, ordering them to be ready for action at any time. A figure suddenly stepped out of the river. To their horror, the figure that stepped out turned out to be not one but two figures. Mo held Yang Kai by the head, dragging him with one hand. Yang Kai hung limply from Mo's grasp as though every bone in his body had been broken. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5997, Spacetime Shadow. Standing above the Spacetime River, Mo held Yang Kai's head as though holding a chicken in his grasp and snorted, "Useless waste. You don't have the right to continue living." Then, he abruptly exerted great strength in his hand. How could Yang Kai, who had lost his ability to fight, withstand such an attack? His head instantly exploded from the impact. However, Mo did not stop there. It punched out and smashed the crippled body to pieces. The scene was imprinted in the eyes of the Ninth Order Masters who were watching the battle from afar. They stood frozen in shock and stared in disbelief. Yang Kai died. The man who was the best at creating miracles and turning the tides of war countless times? The man who had saved the human race from various catastrophes? Did he die just like that? They instinctively refused to believe the scene before them and subconsciously wondered whether they were looking at an illusion. However, the dissipation of his aura that followed the destruction of his body could not be faked. Everything indicated that he was really dead. Yang Kai had died at the hands of Mo. Only a short moment had passed from the time Yang Kai was dragged out of the Spacetime River by Mo. Moreover, Mo had not hesitated in the slightest when he killed Yang Kai. Everything happened so quickly that the Ninth Order Masters had no time to even think about rescuing Yang Kai. A shrill but mournful phoenix cry rang out, accompanied by a furious dragon roar. Su Yan and Yang Shao transformed into their divine spirit forms and charged towards Mo. The rest of the Ninth Order Masters also followed suit and sprang into action. Despite knowing that they were no match for Mo, nobody hesitated in the slightest. Now that Yang Kai was dead, there was nobody in this world who could compete with Mo. Black Ink's strength would soon gain complete control over the universe. When that happened, the human race would no longer have a place to live. This was the final struggle. Su Yan was the fastest. After all, the Tao of Space was the bloodline talent of the Phoenix clan. She had lost her mind after being consumed by her feelings of rage and sorrow. At this moment, there was only one thought left in her heart. She wanted revenge, and if she could not have it, she would accompany Yang Kai to the afterlife. A gorgeous trail of light lingered behind the enormous blue figure. With a few flickers, she arrived on the battlefield. However, a bizarre phenomenon occurred before she could unleash her strength. Ripples suddenly emerged in the originally calm Spacetime River. Following the splashing waves, a figure leapt out. Upon seeing the appearance of the figure, Su Yan froze in shock. Even the Ninth Order Masters behind her were dumbfounded by the sight. The figure who stepped out from the Spacetime River was none other than Yang Kai, who should have been killed by Mo earlier. He's alive. Everybody stared at the scene in front of them in disbelief. Their reactions were similar to when they watched Yang Kai being killed just now. He had clearly died right before their very eyes, and his death had not been an illusion. Nevertheless, he just walked out of the Spacetime River alive. The bizarre phenomenon was beyond their comprehension. This kind of resurrection after death was simply impossible. After stepping out from the surging waves, Yang Kai immediately noticed Su Yan and the others. He seemed to have anticipated the current situation and breathed out deeply. "I'm glad I made it back in time." Step back. Su Yan, who had transformed into an ice phoenix, only hesitated for a brief moment before she turned around and retreated backwards. She also manipulated space principles and quickly transported the people behind her away from the battlefield. The Ninth Order Masters were forcefully returned to their previous positions. This location could barely be considered safe from the aftermath of the battle. Xiang Shan frowned deeply. What just happened? Yang Kai had clearly been killed, so how did he come back alive from the Spacetime River? Although Xiang Shan had lived for many years, he had never encountered such a bizarre sight before. A light flashed through Mi Jingluan's eyes. Creation realm? Could it be the mysteries of the creation realm? What do you mean? Oh, Yang Lai raised an eyebrow at those words. Are you saying that Yang Kai has stepped into the creation realm? Mi Jingluan shook his head. It doesn't seem like it. The Yang Kai who stepped out of the Spacetime River only had the aura of a Ninth Order Master. It did not seem as though he had ascended to a new realm. Be that as it may, Mi Jingluan had no other explanation for the bizarre phenomenon that they just witnessed. What's more, could reaching the creation realm really allow one to revive from the dead? It was simply outrageous and inconceivable. On the battlefield, Missouri watched Yang Kai reappear from the Spacetime River, and turned to look at the scattered pieces of the dismembered body. After confirming that he had indeed slaughtered Yongkai earlier, he immediately understood the situation. A shadow? Yongkai smiled at Mo. I can't fool your eyes after all. Mu and Mo had lived together for such a long time. It was only natural for Mo to know about Mu's methods. Besides, two identical individuals could not exist together unless they originated from different spacetimes. Mu's shadow technique had transcended the limits of the mundane. In order to suppress and seal Mo's source, she had divided her entire life into 3,000 shadows to protect the 3,000 universe worlds inside her spacetime river. Each shadow represented a part of her past, an illusion of sorts that was also real and tangible. Yongkai had obtained Mu's final gift. Devouring and refining her spacetime river had allowed him to massively increase the volume of his own spacetime river. At the same time, he also enhanced and improved his attainments and comprehension of the 10,000 Grand Das. The benefits he received were enormous. Nevertheless, those were not his greatest gains. The greatest benefit he obtained was Mu's shadow technique. That secret technique was definitely the pinnacle of the mysteries of the Grand Das. After fighting Mo, Yongkai had deeply understood that he was no match for his opponent. That was because he could not overcome his limits and advance to a higher realm within a short time. As long as he could not advance to a higher realm, then his battle with Mo would only end with his defeat and death. Be that as it may, he could not afford to die. The human race would be doomed if he fell here. Since he had no means to advance to the next realm within a short time, his only chance of victory was to master Mu's shadow technique. Just one or two of him could not compete with Mo, but what about 3 of him? Or 5? Or 10? Mastering the mysterious shadow technique was Yongkai's only chance at defeating Mo. Therefore, he had mainly been buying time during his previous fight with Mo, so that he could integrate the many Dao strengths into his body completely. Mu had not been able to teach Yongkai about the mystery behind the shadow technique. It was not that she had no intention to teach him the secret technique. On the contrary, it was a secret technique that resulted from reaching the pinnacle of the Grand Das, so it was not something he could learn even if she tried to teach him. The secret technique was something he had to comprehend with his own abilities. Fortunately, Yongkai had embarked on the same path as Mu. It was for that reason she believed that he would eventually comprehend the mysterious secret technique and understand her intentions for giving him her space-time river. Having come into contact with more than 2,000 of Mu's shadows, Yongkai already had some vague ideas about the shadow technique before he devoured and refined Mu's space-time river. Furthermore, Mu's final gift had laid down a solid foundation for him. It was thanks to the foundation that he finally understood the secrets of the shadow technique and was able to perform it through his space-time river. There was no denying that Mo had killed him, but the one who died was a copy of himself who had existed at a certain time in the past. Nonetheless, the demise of a shadow was not without cost. Although it was Yongkai's first time performing the shadow technique, he quickly noticed that something was wrong. He raised a hand to his head in confusion. It feels like I've forgotten something. He had completely lost his memories of the time during which the deceased shadow of him had existed. Never mind. Probably wasn't anything important. He gave a carefree laugh and looked up at Mo. Shall we go for round 2? Mo's lips curled upwards. His expression had been sullen throughout the battle with Yongkai, as though he owed him a massive debt. He also repeatedly made rude and disparaging remarks, but he broke into a smile at this moment. Interesting. The interesting part has yet to come. As soon as the words left Yongkai's mouth, the Dao strengths lingering around his body began to fluctuate. He arrived in front of Mo in the blink of an eye. The space-time river surged behind him. Raising his arm, Yongkai summoned the Azure Dragon Spear and thrust it at Mo. The Azure Dragon Spear should have been destroyed, but the Azure Dragon Spear in the space-time that Yongkai's shadow originated in remained intact. That was why the shattered spear could display its great strength once more. As before, the violent fallout produced by their exchange of blows continuously spread to the surroundings. The spectating Ninth Order masters couldn't help widening their eyes at the sight. They secretly rejoiced that Yongkai had resurrected in time. With their strength, Mo would have effortlessly killed them if they had rushed forward at the time. It was initially assumed that Yongkai would be able to persist for a long time even though the battle was not evenly matched in strength. After all, He had displayed his immense strength previously. Unexpectedly, the battle only lasted for 4 hours before Emo found an opening and slammed his fist into Yang Kai's chest. A gaping hole appeared in Yang Kai's chest. Then his body exploded into pieces. His aura also swiftly dwindled away into nothing. Despite knowing that he would not experience a true death, the Ninth Order Masters could not help being overwhelmed by sorrow at the sight. After eradicating Yang Kai's second shadow, Emo raised his eyes to look in the direction of the space-time river. He had lived with Mu for such a long time, so he was well aware of the shadow technique's strength. The true strength of the secret technique was not power, but the prominent ability to survive that was granted to the users of the secret technique. The shadow technique was created based on the space-time river, so the foundation of the secret technique was the space-time river itself. In order to completely eradicate a user of the shadow technique, the space-time river must first be destroyed. Otherwise, the user of the shadow technique would never perish. For that reason, Emo immediately aimed for the space-time river as soon as he slaughtered Yang Kai's second shadow. Black ink strength around his body surged to cover the entire river. He planned to corrupt the entire space-time river with black ink strength in order to destroy Yang Kai's shadow technique. But before Emo could make a move, another of Yang Kai's shadow jumped out of the space-time river. Yang Kai instantly summoned the Azure Dragon Spear and launched himself at Emo. He even made a mocking remark, "Why are you in such a hurry?" The two figures resumed their vicious battle once more. During that time, Yang Kai fought Emo while gathering various information on the shadow technique. It was his first time performing the secret technique, so his understanding of it was quite lacking. He had to perfectly master the secret technique as soon as possible because that was the only way he could turn the situation around and obtain victory. If he only relied on a never-ending series of battles via his shadows, he would never be able to defeat Emo. However, Yang Kai would need to make countless attempts and gain experience from actual practice to perfectly master the secret technique as soon as possible. I've forgotten more things, but the memories I deliberately preserved have not been forgotten. That's good news. Yang Kai quietly muttered to himself and resumed battle against Emo. Although he was no match for Emo still, he no longer needed to worry about death. That was why he could afford to act more recklessly than before. Shortly afterwards, Yang Kai gained another important piece of information. The shorter the span of space-time allocated, the weaker the shadow's fighting ability. That is certainly worth noting. When that thought passed through his mind, the strength of his shadow faltered. Yang Kai showed weaknesses in his defenses, so Emo instantly found an opening and slaughtered him. Blood rained all over the void. Despite witnessing similar scenes on several occasions already, the Ninth Order Masters watching the battle from afar still widened their eyes at the sight. What reassured them was that the next Yang Kai had already leapt out of the space-time river almost as soon as the previous Yang Kai died. Martial Peak, Chapter 5998, Contribution from the Future. One after another, Yang Kai's shadows stepped out from the space-time river only to perish at Mo's hands. There were no exceptions. The first one had survived the battle for over 4 hours. The second one lasted for less than 4 hours. As for the third, the battle had ended even faster. This is bad. Among those who were watching the battle from a distance, Mi Jingluan's expression turned solemn. He had noticed the issue at hand. It was an extremely serious issue. Although Yang Kai's shadows were endless in supply, his strength seemed to be weakening over time. It was as though time was flowing backwards for him, causing his condition to return to an earlier period with each shadow. At this moment, Yang Kai's aura was only comparable to a newly advanced Ninth Order Master. Hence, he was effortlessly slaughtered by Emo as soon as he stepped out from the space-time river. If the situation continued in this manner, he would not even be able to maintain his cultivation in the Ninth Order. If that were to happen, Emo would be able to exterminate him without even breaking a sweat, no matter how many shadows were to appear. Another one of Yang Kai's shadows in the newly advanced Ninth Order stepped out from the space-time river. Raising a hand, Emo captured the shadow in its grasp and stared at Yang Kai faintly. "You're a disgrace to Mu's legacy." Yang Kai did not panic even though he was captured by Emo. After the repeated deaths of his shadows, he was now very familiar with the feeling of death. Raising an eyebrow at those words, He denied the statement. That might not be true. Mo looked surprised. Do you have another trick up your sleeve? Yongkai grinned. Indeed, a trick you've never seen before. Very good. Mo made a faint smile. While saying so, he exerted some strength into his grip and crushed the shadow in his grasp. In the next moment, another Yongkai leapt out from the space-time river. However, the aura lingering around him was different this time. Something had obviously changed as his aura was once again at the peak of his strength. If the foundation of the shadow technique was said to be the space-time river, then the core of the secret technique was the user of the selected space-time. In Yongkai's case, he was manipulating the 10,000 Dao strengths with his self from this space-time as the core and his space-time river as the foundation. That was how he gained the ability to summon shadows from previous space-time periods. All those who were slaughtered by Mo previously were his shadows. However, the one who walked out of the space-time river now was his main body. It was the him of the current space-time. The foundation and core were extremely important to the shadow technique. Therefore, it was necessary to destroy both aspects to overcome it. Mo had initially wanted to refine the space-time river but was hindered by Yongkai's numerous shadows, which prevented it from taking action. However, he saw a ray of hope when Yongkai's main body emerged from the space-time river. The shadow technique would be destroyed as long as the Yongkai standing before him was eliminated. But could it be that simple? For Yongkai's main body to emerge from the space-time river at this point, his action certainly seemed like a desperate move. After all, the shadows that he summoned earlier had been cleanly eradicated. If he summoned any more shadows from earlier space-time periods, he would only have the cultivation of an 8th-order master, which would not be able to cause any trouble for Mo at all. Combining the situation with what Yongkai mentioned just now, Mo had the vague feeling that Yongkai was about to reveal his trump card. Oddly enough, he found himself looking forward to what was to come for some reason. Yongkai did not disappoint. When his main body stepped out of the space-time river, he lightly chanted, "I offer 1,000 years of my past in exchange for a contribution from the future. Come." As soon as those words left his mouth, the space-time river behind him began to rumble turbulently. The enormous river abruptly shrunk by a large margin. Then another of Yongkai's shadow emerged from within the waters. Seeing this, Mo's eyes narrowed slightly. That was because the aura lingering around this shadow was slightly stronger than Yongkai himself. That should have been impossible. It had to be said that the shadow technique was performed with oneself in the current spacetime as the core. For that reason, the summoned shadow could only be formed from oneself that existed in previous spacetimes. In other words, the summoned shadow should never be stronger than the main body, because the main body was ultimately the strongest. Be that as it may, an exception had appeared in Yongkai's case. Mo instantly figured out the truth behind the situation and exclaimed in astonishment, "You summoned a shadow from the future?" Only Yongkai from the future could be stronger than the main body of Yongkai, who existed in the current spacetime. Mo did not remain idle when he raised this question. After realizing that Yongkai's attainments in the shadow technique had surpassed Mu's, he knew that Yongkai could not be allowed to continue. So he charged forward even while asking this question. In response, Yongkai just stood calmly in place. On the other hand, the summoned shadow stepped forward and immediately engaged in an intense battle with Mo. Although he came from 1,000 years in the future, his strength was still limited even though he was slightly stronger than the main body. He was no match for Mo either, but he would have no trouble buying some time for Yongkai. Furthermore, Yongkai did not need much time. He then shouted again, "Come." A second shadow stepped out from the space-time river. It was another Yongkai who came from another 1,000 years into the future. When the second shadow appeared, the size of the space-time river shrunk again. On the other hand, the aura of Yongkai and the two shadows instantly became closely interconnected. A three fortunes formation was established. The aura of the second shadow was again stronger than the first. The first shadow had been steadily pushed back by Mo's intense assault, but his situation improved as soon as the three fortunes formation was established even though he remained at a disadvantage. Again, Yongkai shouted. The dragon blood in his body boiled and churned, while at the same time, his face began to flush red. A third shadow stepped out from the space-time river. Glancing at the main body, he nodded lightly before he directly charged onto the battlefield. The Three Fortunes formation also instantly transformed into the Four Symbols formation. Again, golden blood trickled out of Yang Kai's nose as a fourth shadow emerged, and the Four Symbols formation evolved into a Five Elements formation. Shadow after shadow emerged from the space-time river without pause. Only when the eighth shadow was summoned did Yang Kai finally stop. It was not that he no longer wanted to continue, but rather that the volume of his space-time river would shrink by a certain extent whenever he summoned a shadow from the future, and the space-time river had vanished completely after he summoned the eighth shadow. He had reached the absolute limit of his shadow technique. At this moment, Yang Kai's main body was bleeding from all 7 of his orifices. It was evident that he had endured tremendous pressure in order to pull this feat off. The shadows that appeared towards the end possessed increasingly powerful auras. When the sixth shadow emerged, its aura had already reached the absolute peak of the ninth order. It was a stage that even Yang Kai's main body had not achieved. The seventh and the eighth shadows also had auras at the peak of the ninth order, but their auras had become even more profound. Looking at Mo, who was being besieged and steadily repelled by the shadows on the battlefield, Yang Kai smiled even though he was covered in blood. In truth, the shadows were already capable of fighting Mo on an equal footing when the Six Paths formation was formed. Therefore, Mo's situation then became more and more critical when it later evolved to become the 7 stars, 8 trigrams, and ultimately 9 palaces formation. The ones who established the battle formation were all Yang Kai's. To be more precise, they were Yang Kai's from future spacetimes. This was a feat that even Mu could not achieve. Her shadow technique could only summon shadows of her past because her spacetime river was incomplete, but that was not the case for Yang Kai. His spacetime river had been perfected, so the power of the shadow technique he wielded was even more terrifying. Martial Peak, Chapter 5999, Clash of the Strongest. Each shadow represented a Yang Kai from subsequent 1,000-year periods in the future. In other words, the 8 shadows represented 8,000 years worth of future spacetime. These 8 shadows combined with Yang Kai's main body to establish the 9 palaces formation. For that reason, the power of the battle formation was even greater than the 9 palaces formation formed between Zhang Ruoxi and her 8 personal guard. Zhang Ruoxi, who had harmonized the power of Yin and Yang with her Heaven's Order bloodline, was certainly stronger than any of Yang Kai's individual shadows. Be that as it may, the strength of the 8 personal guards had held her back. Taking the overall situation into account, Yang Kai's 9 palaces formation was undoubtedly the strongest 9 palaces formations that had appeared on the battlefield. Moreover, the difference in strength was significant. After establishing the 9 palaces formation, Yang Kai's main body took a step forward and charged towards Mo with the combined strength of the other 8 shadows. The 6 paths formation was already sufficient for Yang Kai to fight Mo on even terms, so the 7 stars formation and 8 trigrams formations had left Mo at a complete disadvantage. At this moment, Yang Kai was practically invincible thanks to the 9 palaces formation. With the combined forces of the main body and 8 shadows, Mo was powerless against their intense assault. Black blood and black ink strength splattered everywhere. The 9 Yang Kais moved around swiftly, each one of them having mastered the 10,000 Grand Das. As they were shadows of Yang Kai himself, there was no need for them to worry about their cooperation. The connection between the shadows was so close and firm that there were no flaws in their movements at all. Mo naturally wanted to break free, but it was not easy to escape the besiegement of the battle formation. The Ninth Order masters watching the battle from afar were stunned. Nobody could have imagined that such a strange scene would appear during the final battle. The mysteries of the shadow technique had exceeded their comprehension and imagination. Looking at the current situation, they couldn't help feeling hopeful and excited. That was because they finally saw a glimpse of hope in defeating Mo. In the past, the issue of defeating Mo had always been a plague to the human race. Although they never deliberately avoided the topic, the reality was that they simply did not have sufficient means or strength to oppose Mo. Zhang Ruoxi's support had certainly been a pleasant surprise. Unfortunately, even she was not strong enough to compete with Mo in battle. The battle on the main battlefield was over, and the entire Black Ink clan had been obliterated. If Yang Kai could defeat Mo, then the Black Ink crisis that had been plaguing the human race since the late ancient era would be resolved in one fell swoop. A bright future was awaiting the human race. The light would eventually expunge all darkness. However, the veteran Ninth Order masters soon began to look worried. The current situation might be favorable for them, but nobody knew what price Yang Kai had paid to wield the shadow technique like this. Seeing as the secret technique far exceeded his own abilities, the price he paid would correspond to the strength he obtained. In other words, the greater the strength Yang Kai obtained, the greater the price he had to pay. Furthermore, they did not know how long he could persevere in such an intense battle. The truth was just as they feared. Yang Kai had indeed paid an unimaginable price to wield the shadow technique in such a fashion. His body was also forced to bear the incredible pressure that came from obtaining strength that exceeded his own abilities. In other words, he could not maintain this state for long. He had to finish this battle as soon as possible, and for that reason, he did not hesitate to join the battle himself just to defeat Mo a little faster. Mo was steadily being pushed back under the suppression of the Nine Palaces formation. At this point he was backed into a corner with no ability to fight back. The vexing situation infuriated Mo. As the ancient supreme being, he was a master who not only originated from the same era as Mu, but also once held the opportunity to reign over the entire universe. Even if more than 30% of his source had been suppressed and sealed, he could still not tolerate a junior acting so presumptuously in front of him, especially when this particular junior had stolen Mu's final legacy from him. Amid the intense battle, Mo abruptly turned to look in a certain direction and fixed his gaze on one of Yang Kai's figures. Naturally, it was Yang Kai's main body. The main body was easy to identify. Not only was the aura of the main body the weakest among the other shadows, but the appearance of the main body was also the most disheveled and worse for wear due to the effects of performing the shadow technique. To break the shadow technique, it was necessary to either destroy the spacetime river that acted as the foundation or the main body that acted as the core. At this moment, the spacetime river was nowhere to be seen because it had been evenly divided between Yang Kai's 8 shadows. In that case, Mo only had one option left. Mo turned to face the storm of attacks coming from so many shadows and disregarded the injuries he sustained, even when the strongest shadow chopped off his arm. In the end, the heavy price he paid was worthwhile indeed. He successfully broke out of the encirclement created by the shadows and arrived in front of Yang Kai's main body. Black Ink's strength surged. Raising his remaining hand, Mo blasted his fist at Yang Kai. The punch was quite a distance away from Yang Kai. Nevertheless, the force of the punch was enough to cause space to shatter, time to stop, and the universe to collapse. The blow containing Mo's full strength could not be dodged or avoided. Mo could almost see Yang Kai's main body being smashed into paste, and a hint of triumph flashed through the fury in his eyes, but unexpectedly, the imagined scene did not appear. Despite the incoming blow, Yang Kai's main body did not show the slightest trace of panic. On the contrary, he stepped forward and threw himself in the direction of the blow. Mo was stunned by the strange turn of events. Meanwhile, Yang Kai's main body suddenly unleashed a burst of power that far exceeded his own strength. The force directly penetrated the shackles of space and caused the stagnant time to flow again. Then he punched out at the same time. Damn it! Mo abruptly realized that he had fallen into a trap. For a long time now, the core of the Nine Palaces formation had always been sustained by the strongest shadow. Nevertheless, the fact that Yang Kai's main body could exert such a powerful burst of strength indicated that the core of the Nine Palaces formation could be transferred to the main body. The method to break the shadow technique was to defeat the body which existed in the current spacetime. That was something both Mo and Yang Kai knew. Seeing as the former was bound to target the main body, how could the latter not take precautions? It could even be said that Yang Kai had been waiting for this very moment. A violent force swept out, pushing Mo's figure backwards. In the meantime, the 8 shadows attacked from all directions. Dao's strengths fluctuated wildly, and the barrage of attacks left Mo staggering from the impact. If that were all, Mo's situation would have been bad enough. However, each of the 8 shadows actually exerted strength that far exceeded their limits with every blow that they unleashed. The position as core of the formation was constantly being transferred around. To be precise, the position as core was instantly transferred to whichever shadow was attacking Mo at the time. Such a feat would have been impossible to achieve if it was any other configuration for the makeup of the battle formation, but Yang Kai could freely transfer the position as core between his main body and his shadows without any obstruction. This was the same strategy that Zhang Ruoxi had carried out previously. She and her 8 personal guard had both been the cores and not the cores at the same time. Such a perfect 9 palaces formation could be said to have no flaws whatsoever. More importantly, there was no need to fear the weak links being targeted. In fact, there was only one method to destroy this battle formation, which was to totally annihilate it by brute force. The biggest reason why Zhang Ruoxi had been defeated by Mo was that her personal guard could not withstand the intensity and ferocity of the battle. Transferring the core position to her personal guard was a huge burden on their bodies. Each time they became the core, they would also suffer heavy damage from the pressure. Hence, there was a risk of their bodies collapsing after numerous transfers. The same was also true for Yang Kai. In fact, the burden was greatest on his main body. The main body had already been greatly weakened after performing the shadow technique. With the addition of the pressure from being the core of the formation, he couldn't help vigorously coughing up blood, his complexion turning as pale as a sheet. Be that as it may, he did not hesitate in the slightest. Taking full advantage of the opening created by the 8 shadows who were besieging Mo, Yang Kai stepped forward and approached Mo's arm that had been severed earlier. Although the arm was bleeding profusely, it was not a fully physical body part. Open! Yang Kai raised his arm and pointed at the arm. His divine sense surged turbulently. A moment later, a huge set of doors suddenly appeared in front of him. The door opened slightly to reveal a small gap, and then an indescribable pulling force seeped out from within and devoured the entire severed arm. This arm contained part of Mo's source. Previously, some 30% of Mo's source had been suppressed and sealed by Yang Kai with the help of the profound source gate. If Yang Kai could not suppress and seal this piece of Mo's source quickly, the opportunity to retrieve his severed arm and reabsorb the piece of his source he had lost would remain. Once Mo did so, he would return to full strength again. Now that this piece of his source had been sealed, Mo's aura dropped significantly. Although black ink strength surged at the spot where his arm had been severed and formed a new limb in the blink of an eye, the power that had been suppressed and sealed could no longer return. With the success of this attack, Yang Kai's confidence increased tremendously. This was the first crucial step towards victory. It was also the hardest and most dangerous step in the entire process. This step had paved the way for the rest of the path, making what came next easier. Retrieving the profound source gate, Yang Kai turned around and charged towards Mo. The furious battle resumed once more. The secret that the position as core of the 9 palaces formation could be freely transferred between the shadows had already been exposed. Therefore, Yang Kai had no reason to hide his movements anymore. Dao's strength fluctuated violently around him, and his offensive grew increasingly vicious. Mo was already no match for Yang Kai when the 9 palaces formation was formed, so now that he had lost a part of his source, his situation worsened even more. After a brief but intense battle, one of Yang Kai's shadows found an opening and chopped off one of Mo's arms again. Mo immediately attempted to retrieve his severed arm, but Yang Kai was already prepared for such an opportunity in advance. In the end, Mo was incapable of extricating himself from the battle due to the constant assault by the various shadows. Yang Kai's main body swiftly approached the severed arm, and for the second time, he summoned the profound source gate and devoured the source piece. After completing his task, Yang Kai coughed up another mouthful of blood. He raised his head and glanced at the battlefield. Perceiving the condition of his shadows, he knew that he could not persist for much longer. His main body was not the only one who was severely wounded by now. The rest of the shadows were also in a similar condition. However, only a small portion of these wounds were caused by Mo. Most of them had come from carrying the burden of being the 9 palaces formation core. Yang Kai's immense strength and heritage had allowed him to bear an unimaginable amount of pressure from being the core. That was only possible because it was him. If it were any other 9th Order master instead, they would not have been able to withstand the pressure after being a core 3 times in such a situation, regardless of their strength. I have to end this as quickly as possible, Yang Kai muttered under his breath. Then he stepped forward and joined the battlefield. In the next moment, his strongest shadow took on the boundless pressure from being the core and unleashed a continuous storm of attacks without care whether his body could withstand the burden or not. Mo clearly faltered under the violent bombardment of the strongest shadow. While Mo was busy stewing in rage, The strongest shadow threw himself forward and disregarded Mo's counterattack to restrain Mo firmly. At such a close distance, he grinned at Mo and revealed a sinister row of fangs. Mo immediately understood Yang Kai's intentions. Roaring furiously, he desperately struggled to escape. However, the attacks that came blasting from all directions rained down on Mo and the shadow the next moment. Even the strongest shadow could not withstand this barrage of attacks. Thus, he exploded and disintegrated completely. Likewise, Mo's body was battered from the attack. The left part of his body was gone, revealing the internal organs within his abdomen cavity. Mo staggered backwards weakly, a strange light flashing through his eyes for a moment. Before he could do anything though, another shadow charged towards him. Martial Peak Chapter 6000. Many thanks. The strongest shadow had already been shattered, and with that, the 9 palaces formation had also been reduced to the 8 trigrams formation, which significantly reduced its might. At the same time, Mo's aura was not as strong as before. After 2 pieces of his source were sealed by Yang Kai, his aura had been notably weakened. As the remaining 7 shadows attacked Mo, Yang Kai's main body summoned the profound source gate for a 3rd time, suppressing and sealing another piece of Mo's shattered body. Mo's aura weakened once again. The 8 trigrams formation was now sufficient to deal with the current Mo. A series of fearsome attacks struck back the battle formation, destroying another of Yang Kai's shadows. In exchange, Mo once again suffered heavy injuries. The 8 trigrams formation had been reduced to the 7 stars formation. Previously, Yang Kai's shadows had emerged from the space-time river one after another, joining the battle formation and making it stronger. But the situation had reversed now. As more of these shadows perished, the might of the battle formation also began to weaken. The only benefit was that Mo also weakened. Each time a shadow perished, Mo's body would shatter and Yang Kai's main body would seize the opportunity to suppress and seal another piece of the former source. In the end, all of the shadows disappeared, leaving Yang Kai bleeding all over, staring right across at a miserable and weakened Mo. The current Mo had a large amount of his source suppressed and sealed, which significantly decreased his strength. He was no longer as mighty as before, and even the rich and dense black ink strength lingering around him was now extremely faint, almost invisible. The current Mo had lost more than 90% of his source. In other words, he only had 10% of his peak strength, which was far from prime condition. Right then, several figures flew over and formed a circle, surrounding the battlefield. They were the human race masters who had been watching from afar, as well as the giant spiritual gods Ada and Aer. Previously, it was impossible for them to intervene in the battle. Even the 2 giant spiritual gods were unable to approach, let alone the 9th Order masters. However, as Mo's strength suffered with the destruction of Yang Kai's shadows again and again, the spectating masters finally had a chance to be useful. Mo had lost. It was simply impossible for him to deal with so many masters with his current strength. Just the 2 giant spiritual gods alone were enough to overpower him now. Nonetheless, Mo was laughing, his voice sounding extremely cheerful. Zhang Ruoshi stood before Yang Kai with the Heaven's Order sword in her hand, vigilantly staring at Mo. Although Mo was in a miserable state right now, no one knew what kind of methods this ancient being still had hidden up his sleeve. As such, they still had to take necessary precautions. Yang Kai. Mo's smile faded as it shouted at Yang Kai. Let's settle this. Behind Zhang Ruoshi, Yang Kai calmed his roiling vitality and replied, Good. Sir. Zhang Ruoshi shouted, Allow me. She still had the strength to launch one last attack and was confident that she could take down Mo with it, so she naturally wouldn't let Yang Kai take the risk. No. There's no need. Yang Kai stepped forward and walked past Zhang Ruoshi, staring at the nearby Mo. Even as victory was within his grasp, there was no trace of the pride or arrogance on Yang Kai's face as a victor should have. Rather, there was only a complicated expression. None of you is to interfere. Yang Kai gently ordered. The gathered masters furrowed their brows ever so slightly. In the current situation, the best course of action was undoubtedly to attack together and take down Mo in an instant, ending this disaster that had lasted for millions of years once and for all. However, Yang Kai actually told them not to interfere. No one knew what Yang Kai was thinking or up to. However, out of their trust in Yang Kai, everyone still acquiesced to his demand. Be that as it may, they still maintained their encirclement and focused their auras. If anything happened to Yang Kai, Mo would immediately be attacked from all directions. When dealing with Mo, there was no need to discuss honor or morals. Despite being surrounded on all sides, Mo's expression still remained calm. He simply stared at Yang Kai and shouted, "Come." As soon as he spoke, his figure rushed straight towards Yang Kai, leaving a streak of black light behind him. Simultaneously, Yang Kai also charged towards Mo. The moment the two figures collided, everyone's hearts jumped to their throats. However, the next thing that entered their sight left them relieved. Yang Kai's fist had smashed into Mo's chest, while Mo's fist had stopped right before Yang Kai's head. Mo spurted a mouthful of black blood as his raised fist limply fell, standing at arm's length from one another. When their eyes suddenly met, Mo smiled at Yang Kai. "Many thanks." Yang Kai nodded to him, and thought for a moment before adding, "I will let you see the world Mu wished for you to see." Despite the jet-black blood flowing from the corners of Mo's mouth, a free and relieved expression appeared on his face after hearing this. "Then that's enough." Yang Kai didn't say anything more, and summoned the profound source gate. As the gate cracked open, it swallowed Mo whole. Right afterwards, the door slowly closed itself, sealing the endless darkness behind it. Back then, it was Mu who had rescued Mo from behind this door. And after more than 1,000,000 years, Yang Kai had sent him back through it. This ancient being had lived his life. He did not dare say he didn't have any regrets, but at the very least, his life had certainly been quite an exciting one. Yang Kai spurted a mouthful of blood before sitting down cross-legged, taking out a handful of pills from his space ring and stuffing them into his mouth. Everyone immediately rushed to him upon seeing this. Su Yan flew straight behind Yang Kai and sat down, allowing him to lean on her. After a while, Yang Kai's chaotic aura finally started to stabilize. As he opened his eyes, he saw many pairs of eyes gazing at him with worried looks. "I won't die," Yang Kai comforted everyone, allowing them to relax. Mi Jingluan finally couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked, "Why did you thank Mo at the last moment?" Although no one heard Yang Kai's words of thanks, they could tell what he was saying by reading Yang Kai's lips. Yang Kai heaved a sigh, explaining, "From beginning to end, Mo never went all out." "What?" Oinglai was shocked. "He didn't go all out? How is that possible?" The others also had a look of incredulity on their faces. To their surprise, their battle almost ended in mutual destruction, even when Yang Kai had given it everything he had. Did that mean Mo would have obtained the final victory if he had not held back? Yang Kai continued, "It's not that Mo didn't use his full strength, but rather that he didn't resort to any of his other tricks. Yang Kai had always been on guard against certain methods. The Royal Lords had their Royal Lord secret technique, which could instantly corrupt Eighth Order masters. As the Black Ink clan's creator, how could Mo not have similar methods? What's more, such a method when used by Mo would surely be far more profound than what a Royal Lord could produce. Of course, Yang Kai had the soul-warming lotus protecting his soul, and the World Tree clone protecting his small universe, but even so, he could not say with absolute certainty that they would be able to defend against such a move. Song once mentioned that a mere clone could not completely negate Mo's Black Ink strength. Only the World Tree itself would be capable of that. So, when Yang Kai fought with Mo, he had always been on guard. But from beginning to end, Mo had not used that mysterious method. Was it that Mo couldn't? Impossible. He just didn't want to. Even after Yang Kai summoned his 8 shadows, Mo still held a trump card that could have instantly turned the tables. Furthermore, he never needed to fight Yang Kai head-on. He could have just stalled for time, and the 8 shadows from the future spacetimes would slowly have dissipated. Not to mention, there was even a decent chance Mo could have broken away from the 9 Palaces formation's blockade and escaped. At the very least, it was clear Mo had no such intention. From beginning to end, he had fought with Yang Kai head-on. At first glance, it seemed like Mo wanted to kill Yang Kai no matter the cost, but was that really the case? Therefore, although Mo had been fighting with all his strength against Yang Kai, he had not truly gone all out. Martial Peak Chapter 6001 Price. This was the reason why Yang Kai thanked Mo in the end. "I'm afraid this is the end he wanted." Mu had protected the human race and the universe for countless years, and even after her death, she had left behind many contingencies and hidden hands. Although the world was in ruins and the human race were like ants to Mo, it was still what Mu wanted to protect. Under the premise that the world had someone else strong enough to protect it, Mo was willing to go along with Mu's will. Of course, if Yang Kai didn't have the necessary strength, Mo wouldn't mind killing him. In that case, Mo would have still set aside a great territory for the human race to live and multiply after he dominated the entire universe. This way, the human race wouldn't be wiped out and he would have a reasonable explanation for Mu. At the end of the day, Mo was not inherently evil. In the late ancient era, he had even protected the human race and took it upon himself to help them gain their freedom. If it weren't for him and the 10 martial ancestors working together, the human race of that era would not have been able to defeat the early ancient era's great monsters. It was just that he was unable to control his gradually growing power and eventually lost his way, especially after Mu's demise. When she died, no one was able to restrain him anymore. Today's ending was something Mo himself probably sought from the start. Everyone sunk into silence after listening to Yang Kai's explanation of what truly happened. As what Mu would want others to know. Their current feelings were tough to describe. Mo's life might have been filled with misery, but he was still the one who had brought about the pain and suffering of the human race for millions of years. Had there been no Mo, the human race would have ruled the world unchallenged after defeating the early ancient era's great monsters. There would not have been a war that lasted for so many eons. The Black Ink disaster had caused unimaginable losses to the human race, with countless elites having sacrificed their lives to bring it to an end. As far as the human race was concerned, no matter how miserable Mo's life had been, it was an irrefutable fact that he was the human race's greatest enemy. As the adage goes, the winner is the king, and the loser is the villain. Gotcha! Suddenly it sounded as if something had cracked. Everyone promptly turned to look at the source, and was immediately shocked. Big brother! Yang Shui called out, staring at Yang Kai's face in horror. Everyone also looked serious as a crack appeared on Yang Kai's face. It was not a normal wound, and neither was Yang Kai bleeding from it. After the first crack, another one appeared soon after, and then another and another. They were not just on Yang Kai's face but on his hands as well. The current Yang Kai looked like a piece of porcelain that was on the verge of shattering, and everyone could feel fearsome Da's strength seeping from these cracks. Yang Kai looked down at his hands and muttered to himself, "It came faster than I expected." He seemed to have anticipated his current situation. "What's happening?" Su Yan asked from behind him, her tender body uncontrollably trembling. After so many years of struggle, Mo was finally defeated and the Black Ink disaster was resolved. The future belonged to the human race, and it was foreseeable that the world would become a far better place. Yang Kai was the biggest contributor in the final battle, but at this moment, his entire body was shrouded in an inexplicable crisis. Everyone could not help but be nervous. What was even more disturbing was that no one had ever seen such injuries before. Yang Kai gently patted the back of Su Yan's hand, comforting her. "I won't die, but I don't have much time left." "What does that mean?" Xiao Xiao asked. How should I put it? Everyone around him was worried to death, but Yang Kai, the main person involved, remained completely calm and composed. The shadow technique was created by Mu with the spacetime river as its foundation. I inherited her legacy and walked the same path as her, so naturally I can also use this secret technique. However, Mu's spacetime river was incomplete, so her shadow technique was actually incomplete. She could only summon shadows from the past, and once those shadows dispersed, the memories of that period would also disappear. On the other hand, I have perfected this secret technique, and can summon shadows from the future. Each shadow I summoned in the battle just now was from 1,000 years in my future. Now that the shadows have already been destroyed, I must pay the price. The more powerful a secret technique was, the harder it was to use it. The shadow technique was undoubtedly the most powerful secret technique that had ever appeared in this world, especially since Yang Kai had surpassed his predecessor and used it to defeat Mo. The price he had to pay would definitely not be small either. Once the shadows of the past are destroyed, the memories of the corresponding past will also disappear. So, what kind of price do you have to pay when your future shadow is destroyed? Mi Jingluan asked solemnly. I won't exist in those periods in the future. You won't exist? What do you mean? Although I can't explain it clearly, you can think of it as a literal statement. Mi Jingluan was silent for a moment, digesting this unbelievable news. You summon 8 shadows, so does that mean 8,000 years of your future just disappeared? Indeed. What happens after 8,000 years? Yang Kai shook his head. I have no idea. After all, this was the first time he had used the shadow technique, so although he knew that he would cease to exist for the next 8,000 years, all traces of his existence would be erased by the spacetime Tao strength of the universe, he couldn't say for certain what would happen after that. How could this be? Yang Shui's eyes turned red. It's not a big problem. I should be able to return after 8,000 years, Yang Kai comforted. Despite his assurance, everyone could hear the uncertainty in his voice. His back suddenly became lighter as Su Yan suddenly left. She returned soon after, but this time she brought Yu Rumeng and the others with her. The eyes of all the women turned red as they tried to hold back their grief, preventing their tears from rolling down. Su Yan had already briefed everyone of the situation, so they knew the crisis Yang Kai was about to encounter. In the short time Su Yan was not there though, further cracks had appeared on Yang Kai, and the leakage of Tao strengths had become more and more obvious. Yang Kai really didn't have much time left, and the backlash from the shadow technique was even stronger than he had imagined. Mi Jingluan shot a glance at the crowd, whereupon everyone apart from Yang Kai's close relatives retreated to the side. The women who had been brought here by Su Yan finally couldn't hold it in any further and burst into tears. In the end, it was Yu Rumeng who acted like the big sister of the family and managed to compose herself first. Before she could say anything more though, the skin on Yang Kai's face began to peel off and disappear. Even though they were all 8th and 9th order masters now, there was nothing they could do. Everyone held back their grief as they helplessly watched Yang Kai's figure gradually vanish. At the very last moment, Yu Rumeng shouted at Yang Kai, "You heartless bastard! Mark my words, if you don't come back after 8,000 years, I'll take my sisters and marry someone else." Yang Kai gave her a smile. This sounds so familiar. Yu Rumeng's will finally shattered, and she broke into tears. She tightly grabbed Yang Kai's hand and begged, "You must come back. You must." Yang Kai swept his gaze over all of them one by one, as if he wanted to imprint their faces into the depths of his soul, before gently nodding and assuring, "Of course." Right then, scattered specks of light emerged before an enormous river spanning across the void appeared, enveloping Yang Kai. Soon after, an enormous wave came crashing down on him, swallowing him into the river. The river slowly disappeared, and so did Yang Kai along with it, leaving behind a group of women standing there in a daze, their endless sorrow flowing like a river. "Something's not right," Mi Jingluan, who was watching from afar, suddenly whispered before turning to Xiang Shan, "Do you feel it?" Xiang Shan nodded his agreement. "There's something wrong." The other 9th order masters more or less felt the same way. Although they couldn't figure out what exactly was wrong, 9th order masters were extremely perceptive. Their senses were so sharp that even just a slight disparity around them would arouse their suspicion. Everyone made their respective probes, but none of them were able to find anything amiss. Unable to find anything wrong, they had no choice but to put this matter aside, but they still maintained a certain degree of vigilance. The curtain of the final battle had already fallen. The Allied army had finished off the Black Ink Clan army, while Mo had been completely sealed by Yang Kai. Although the greatest contributor had suffered severe backlash from his secret technique, and had his existence wiped out by space and time for the next 8,000 years, when all was said and done, the victory needed to be publicized. When Mi Jingluan and the others returned and spread the news that Mo had been ended, the human race army of millions that had been waiting here all cheered and danced in joy. The war that had been going on for millions of years had finally come to an end. Now, all under the heavens belonged to the human race. After the battle, the casualties were counted and the aftermath was dealt with in an orderly manner. The small stone race army had already withdrawn and returned to the chaotic dead territory through the void corridor. The human race also began their withdrawal half a month later. The void corridor created by Zhang Ruoxi saved the human race a lot of time. Not everyone left, however. Headed by Su Yan and Yu Rumeng, Yang Kai's wives, his disciples Yang Shui, Yang Shao, and several others all stayed behind. They remained in the place where Yang Kai had disappeared. quietly waiting for his return. The next 8,000 years would definitely be very dull and long, but so long as they could see Yongkai the moment he returned, any amount of waiting would be worth it. A fleet of dilapidated warships entered the chaotic dead territory through the void corridor. The current Zhang Ruoshi could still somehow maintain the balance of yin and yang in her body, so the chaotic dead territory was now a safe place. Be that as it may, she couldn't maintain this state for much longer. In order to fight Mo and kill the royal lords, she had burned too much of her Heaven's Order bloodline. Once the human race army left the chaotic dead territory, she would break the harmony with the two. At that time, Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan would reappear, and Zhang Ruoshi would lose her previous strength. At the end of the day, if she didn't have her Heaven's Order bloodline that could maintain the harmony of yin and yang, she would just be a Ninth Order master. The fleet passed through the chaotic dead territory and soon returned to the 3,000 worlds. Many years ago, when the human race army first set off from the star boundary, they had some 30 million soldiers, but now only slightly more than 10 million remained. Around 60% of the soldiers had died in this final war. Despite the terrible losses, compared to the solemn and miserable atmosphere they had when they first set out, everyone was high in spirits, and every warship was buzzing with cheers and laughter, despite the sad state of the army. On a certain purifying black ink warship that was so wrecked that it looked like it would fall apart at any moment, Mi Jingluan was standing at the bow with Xiang Shan beside him. The two calmly listened to the hustle and bustle on the other warships and exchanged a knowing glance. The human race has won, but the greatest contributor is unable to celebrate with us. It's quite regretful, Mi Jingluan couldn't help but lament. Xiang Shan nodded his agreement. Now that I think about it, had he not forced those peace treaties with the Black Ink clan, the human race wouldn't have been able to accumulate enough strength. That's right, Mi Jingluan nodded. By the looks of it, that treaty was an important turning point in the rise of the human race. What was that treaty called? What's it called again? The two Ninth Order masters glanced at each other before the smiles on their faces slowly faded away, gradually replaced by solemn looks. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.